So as you guys have hopefully heard from your campus staff over the course of the last couple of weeks, this piece of theology is primarily about sexuality. But we're also going to be talking about marriage. We're going to be talking about gender. We're going to be talking about a whole lot of things. But as with almost every field of study, almost everything that you can think to study, we have a tendency that I think is, well, for lack of a better word, it's a pretty dumb way to go about thinking about things. And it's this. We tend to oversimplify. Oversimplification is one of the main reasons why prejudice is so apparent in our society. Oversimplification happens because we feel this innate need to know things. And if I know them, then I have these clear rules and boundaries that make me feel comfortable. And if I feel comfortable, then I can rest assured in the fact that I am right. And that's a problem. We don't think that that's a good way to think about most things. Tonight, we're going to ask you guys to start first with God and then consider culture, not the other way around. We do not find God through culture, but rather through God we can see our culture the way that we are supposed to. We all happen, whether you think of it as being fortunate or unfortunate, to be looking through shaded lenses. Those lenses, the best I can tell, really are our culture. Our culture shades the way that we see everything, and this topic is certainly no different. And I want to ask you guys tonight to be thinking about who is God and what does He actually think about our sexuality, or about our gender, or about marriage. Tonight is about teaching you guys how to think, not about what to think. Tonight's not going to be our complete doctrine. We're going to teach you guys orthodoxy regarding sexuality, and we're going to list through all the doctrines that you need to think in order to be right. So that whenever you come across somebody that struggles with being bisexual or asexual or homosexual, you can say, this is the truth. Right? That's not what tonight is about. Nor is it about Focus's staff views on everything. People on our staff think independently. I'm not sure if you guys know that. I know you guys tend to say things like Focus dating, or what Focus believes about baptism, or what Focus... And I'm like, who is this Focus person? And how can I learn from them? Because as far as I can tell, the people on our staff have been encouraged and are encouraged for as long as I've been around staff to think for themselves, to think in accordance with the gospel, to think in accordance with the wisdom of the people around us, both in our communities and outside of our communities, and we think different things. And you're going to hear from a number of different viewpoints tonight. We're going to hear from Melissa Kenfield. We're going to hear from my brother Brad Davis. We're also going to hear from Sarah King. And they all have their own unique takes on these things. And I want to encourage you guys to listen well. We want to encourage you to think well about this. We're not going to encourage you just to think something specifically, but rather we want to give you a new way to think, and we want to give you guys new questions to wrestle with. So if you've come tonight thinking, man, here it is. This is the big showdown. We're going to figure out who's right about all this stuff. We're going to figure out whether what they think is what lined up with what I think, which, by the way, probably means that they're right? We're right if we think what you think. And if we don't, then we're probably wrong, right? Think again. Maybe it's something different than that, right? It's not about that. But I think success tonight is going to look like you exiting this building with a bunch of new questions to wrestle with. Because as far as I can tell, the people with the most learning are always the ones that have the most questions, and they have the best questions. And they're also the people that are least likely to give simple, just kind of easy answers to things. Oh, yeah, surely God this, surely this. Well, it's not that easy, I don't think. As a sociology professor, I've had the privilege of getting to teach about gender and sexuality for years. And one of the things that I've kind of come to is that, I'm still confused. As someone that's studied it and taken classes over it and taught it at a university level, I'm still really, really confused about a number of things, and I have a lot of questions. I have a whole lot of questions. And I reflect as much in my classes. I have a lot of questions. You should too. Okay? You should too. The key to thinking well tonight is going to start and end with humility in the way that you think. Be open, listen, and ask good questions. That's what this is about. I'm going to introduce the activity that we have going on tonight. Yeah?
We need to do something else first.
Sure.
A lot of the packets printed wrong, so I need you to look and see if you only have 3 sheets of paper, the second one becoming gibberish. After you have another packet, and you figure out how many we still need to buy. So, they're going to come up the aisle. How many of you have this packet? Kind of looks like this after the second paper.
Raise your hand if you got a bad packet. I got 3 people total so far. Everyone else has good packets? Or are you just kind of hoping that they'll be fine? Yeah. Debbie, there's one back there. There's a tiny one right here. There we go. Any others? Huh? Here? Is this good? That's right. Okay. So, I'm going to introduce you guys. Go ahead and try to reel it back in now. All right. Interesting stuff happening back there. So I want to introduce to you guys an activity that we're doing tonight. And we're calling it Voices from Our Community. Throughout the night, we're going to hear from 7 different people who have anonymously written some part or a larger part of their testimony as someone who struggled through the issues that we're talking through tonight, namely with sexuality. We've asked other students who are not those students to read those testimonies from brothers and sisters in our community. So the people that are going to be reading up at the mics are not the people they're not sharing their own testimonies. They're sharing the testimony of somebody who has anonymously written in our community about struggling with that issue. And we're going to explain that again after. Interesting route. Interesting. I like your boldness, Nathan. So, very interesting. You're like the guy at Collin College who walk in the middle of a sermon and buy something out of the vending machine. I'm always like, no other vending machines. He's like, whatever, bro. I had class. I got this going on. All right, so these voices from our community, the reason that we're doing these is because we want to hear from people who have actually had to grapple through this. I think we tend to dehumanize these issues. And we turn them into issues instead of the fact that we're dealing with people.
Right.
Tonight is not about an issue. It's about real people. Real people who've had these struggles. None of the people that we're talking about have been people who said, you know what? I think I'm going to have this struggle.
That's right.
You know? It's not because they came out of the womb and thought to themselves, I'm going to be disobedient in my sexual desires. No, that's not even what that's about at all. We have to stop thinking like that if we want to be people of God who can understand the people around us. We are talking about people, not issues. We are talking about brothers and sisters, not them. We are talking about people that have real concerns, real issues, that are confused, that feel rightfully so neglected by or abused by or rejected by the church. And we need to start the level of communication that says, we want to talk. We want to hear your story. And there is a lot more than just the 7 people that we asked tonight to write their testimonies. There's a lot more than that in our community. If you were a minister in our community, you'd realize that. A lot more. But we want to be people who are empathetic and who really take time to understand. Remember, we're dealing with people, and we're talking with and about real people and not issues. So, the students that are getting up to share tonight, they volunteered to get to read these anonymous testimonies, but I hope that you guys take time to think through somebody else's perspective. Put yourself in their shoes. What if that's the idea for tonight. And then we'll go from there. And Haven, if you want to go ahead and read the first testimony, that would be great.
When I was a little girl, an older friend of mine acted as a sexual aggressor while he played games that were meant to be lighthearted. Playing pretend usually resulted in me playing the role of a defenseless princess while my friend molested me. When I tried to ask for help from my older sibling, she thought I was lying. I never took it to an adult. My dad was addicted to pornography. When I spent the summers with him, I often walked in on him masturbating to his computer screen. I remember seeing the woman, and the glow of the screen made my heart go dark. In middle school, my mom used to make my older sister take me with her wherever she went. Her boyfriend, who was 4 years older than me, molested me every couple of months over the course of their 3-year relationship. In high school, I started performing sexual favors for a boy that I liked. He didn't really want anything to do with me, but the favors continued. Eventually, he decided to date me exclusively. I lived with him for a while, and during this time, avoided Jesus at all costs. You know those sermons where the pastor takes out the fresh, crisp, beautiful rose to illustrate to an audience of adolescents that they shouldn't have sex? He holds it proudly in the air and asks them, "Who thinks this rose is beautiful? How many of you would like to have it?" The crowd nods, raises their hands, of course. They want the rose. So the pastor gets down from the stage. He gives the rose to the kid on the front row and instructs them to pass it around until everyone's touched it. So they comply, as crowds do, and eventually they send the rose back up to the pastor, who has resumed his rightful place on the stage. This time the pastor holds up the rose as far away from himself as possible. It looks different. The petals are wilted and dying, no longer a brilliant shade of red. The stem is all bent out of shape. It's no longer a rose, it's a ghost of a rose, a corpse. The pastor gets real quiet and he asks them, who would want it now? You see, I was that rose. All sense of myself, what little identity and security I had found in my younger days had been long lost. Even though I'd met Jesus as a little girl and been sure of his goodness and his mercy, I couldn't believe that Jesus would want me after all of that. I was wrong. Jesus, this beautiful man, wanted me. He'd been trying to tell me that the whole time, but I couldn't hear him over the sound of my own shame. While the pastor was holding me up with a disgusted face for the whole world to condemn, my Jesus was jumping up and down in the middle of the room shouting, "She is mine." Jesus saved me from a lifetime of hypersexualization and shame just before I got to college. He told me that he loved me, and for the first time, I understood grace. Giving my sexual brokenness to Jesus wasn't and isn't easy. There's been a real learning curve. Learning how to love myself as his daughter, pure and spotless and whole, took some time. He used the people in this room to breathe new life into my brokenness. He's used you to tell me who I am. The more I lean into you, the less I try to hide, and the more I'm healed. Thank you.
Regardless of the voice through which this is being read, it remains imperative that the narrative begin with an expression of gratitude. Gratitude to Brandon Worsham for extending an opportunity such as this. Gratitude to the Focus community for allowing the curation of such vulnerable yet necessary moments. And gratitude to you for the commitment of your presence and the gift of your time. For purposes relative to the provision of a generalized self-description, which holds no identifiable qualities even by the standards of my internal cognition, it would perhaps be key to mention that I am a man. Nevertheless, for time immemorial, I have always considered myself special. Contrary to mainstream narratives, I didn't grow up thinking or feeling that something was off, or that I was different or weird or anything like the usual non-conforming descriptors would typically suggest. Instead, I felt extraordinary. I felt appreciated. I felt thought about. In short, I felt loved. Nonetheless, these self-identifying properties weren't built to last. As I grew older and gained more exposure to the world and its surrounding people, it became apparent that I was less unique and more strange. However, self-love persisted, and with time I developed an affinity for my peculiarities. At a young age, I played with Barbie, who was my icon. I played house and was often the mommy. I even got married, wearing the curtains of my best friend's house. And I even had babies, which was essentially pulling out a teddy bear that had been stuffed in my shirt. In other words, I was a girl. I can say this now, though I've been advised by my mother not to interpret my childhood with a psychoanalytic lens. However, this is much more than psychobabble, because before the realization of this inherent girlhood, perhaps now womanhood, I always considered myself gay. I was beaten for this consideration, spat on, ostracized, people literally walking out of the way when I was coming, and eventually rendered homeless. I've lost friends because of this LGBT affiliation, lost family because of it, and can also be imagined I've lost opportunities. Therefore, if there was a way to change my mind, I would have done so by now. However, these trials, a consummate refining process for many LGBT folk, has in part afforded me the gift of realizing that I am a trans woman. The preceding words were hard to write, because in doing so, I connected with an internalized feeling of alienation from the guys in my core, some friends in my life, from my mother, and unfortunately, even from God. Nevertheless, the actualization of this truth is one that I hope to fulfill. Not, however, without the approval of God, which I hope to gain through prayer and counseling, as well as the relational and financial resources necessary. One needs a support network. One needs friends. One needs self-love. And one needs God. Thus, I charge you with this. The next time you think of an individual, of the psychosexual peculiarities they embody, and perhaps when you think of yourself, remember the process it took to get there, all that may have entailed it, and how the individual's life, even if it's yours, could be made better with your love, your understanding, or in the least, your respect.
Okay, thank you guys so much for reading that. That was really, really awesome. I'm really excited about those. My name is Sarah, and I don't really have anywhere to clip a mic pack on a dress, which is a gender issue that I will be discussing at length this evening. All right.
Flip it up to the...
Okay. So, what if I want to move? We'll work it out. Okay, again, I'm going to say one more time, introduce myself, but only one more time. Because one time at parent night, I think I told them my name was Sarah 8 times. So I am Sarah. I work with the campus ministry over at UT Arlington. That was third. And as Sarah, I'm really thrilled to be here speaking with you guys about gender. Before I get started, I really want to start us off with a prayer and then with a little bit of stand-up comedy, as is kind of my personality. So, Father, thank you so much for a place to discuss such important issues so candidly, Lord, and I pray that your Spirit would be here strongly, Jesus, and that areas tonight that really touch or affect people, that you would minister to them, Lord, that you would meet people where they're at, and that you would teach us as a community how to meet people where they're at and how to love them through whatever sexual brokenness they're dealing with, Lord. And we thank you for giving us such amazing gifts as these bodies physically and as this body, this community that we get to be a part of. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, as I was thinking about and preparing for this talk, I came across a stand-up comic that I really, really liked, and he had some things to say about gender. It's kind of weird. There is actually nothing to look at. It's just audio, so you can look at me. I won't be talking, but I'm going to play this for you, and I'm actually going to play it through my lapel mic, so it's kind of weird. So you can just look at the screen, look at each other, whatever.
Guys, we're not good at marriage. I mean, that's just, it's that easy. Like, we're not prepared for marriage like women are. Y'all are very prepared. Your whole life, every toy y'all played with was built for marriage. Everything's preparing you. Like, when you're a baby, they give you a baby doll. So they give you a baby when you're a baby. You don't even know you're alive yet. And they're just like, look, I'd probably start figuring this out. This is where it's going. And then they give you Barbie and Ken. They are in a relationship. They live in a house together. And that's where you learn how to make drama. You get, getting pretty good at that. Then you actually would play house. You would like fake vacuum with your friends. That was like awesome times. Like now, like when I see my wife vacuum, I'm like, man, she's living her childhood dream. Like she has made it, you know? She's made it. As a guy, we don't have any. Like, we play Fort. You got to keep everybody out of where you are. The only toys we had were Transformers and Ninja Turtles. Those are not even real things. None of them had wives. They weren't married. I never played with, like, my Ninja Turtles, and I had them going to fight Shredder. And then Michelangelo was like, hey, man, can y'all give me, like, 2 seconds? My wife just showed up. I don't know, dude. She looks furious about something. Like, and then she's like, what are y'all doing over there? Why is that April skank still hanging out? And they're like, I don't know, man. Don't read into this. Like, she got mad at me because on her last birthday, I bought her an oven for her birthday. So, it's first of all, it's a pretty nice oven. And there was also thought and there was heart behind it because, like, I remember just like the vacuum, her other favorite toy as a kid was the Easy Bake Oven. Yeah, so to go with her big girl vacuum, I got her a grown-up adult oven. You know, like, that's not impressive. Like, if she came home and bought me a truck and it turned into a live robot, I would lose my mind. It's the best gift ever. I can't believe she got me this.
Okay, yeah, so that's just a little bit of what I'm going to be talking about tonight. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys about gender and about sexuality and all of that. I have always been pretty interested in this topic. My aunts are lesbians, and 2 of my best friends in high school were gay men, and I've grown up in a super liberal home. So when I came to Christ, those were all things I had to kind of reconcile and think through. And then in light of our current cultural situation with icons like Caitlyn Jenner of Kardashian fame and Laverne Cox from Orange is the New Black really coming to the forefront of media attention, that's something that I've been spending a lot more time thinking about as well. Plus, I'm really into theater, and for a period, I would do just about anything if it meant I could be on stage. If you want to go to the next one again. And so that's me, and that's a mustache. So the light kind of takes away from it, but the mustache is about the same color as my hair. So I have been thinking a lot about gender and what all that entails. If you want to click to the next one. So in preparing, so that you can take a picture of it. So in preparing for all of this, I started to think about what my experience with gender was growing up and in adulthood, and started to peel back some of my own assumptions and biases about gender and what all of that means. So I really hope to help you do the same thing tonight, to peel back some of your assumptions and biases about what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman. But before I can do that, before I can really get into unpacking that, I wanted to start by defining some terms for you so that we're all on the same page with terms, and that's where a lot of your blanks are. Now, I want you to remember that the way that I am choosing to define something tonight does not make you an expert on any of these terms. It does not make you an expert on when someone says or what they mean when they say that they're transgender or that, they deal with any of these things. You are not an expert because you've sat in on this lecture. So I would always, especially because I'm not an expert and I'm teaching you, so I would really urge you to always ask people what they mean. When they say that they're trans, when they say that they're genderqueer, or they're experiencing any sort of gender incongruence, that you ask them what they mean. But for my purposes tonight, I'm going to tell you what I mean. I got a lot of these terms from this book called Understanding Gender Dysphoria, Navigating Transgender Issues in a Changing Culture. And this book blessed me a lot. If you are here and you are experiencing any sort of gender dysphoria or questions about your gender and sexuality in the context of Christian community, I would really recommend this book. It is a really, really neat book, and I love it. The author's name is Mark Yarhouse. Understanding Gender Dysphoria. I'm trying to anticipate what you're saying. Is that what you're asking? Understanding Gender Dysphoria is the name of it. There's like a subtitle, but you don't really need it. And it's in your references page. We have references at the end of the packet. So gender is the psychological, social, and cultural aspects of being male or female. So my gender is female, if that makes sense. Hopefully it will. I'm going to use myself as an example a lot. I hope that doesn't make you uncomfortable. It doesn't make me uncomfortable. Okay. So my gender is female. And we need to realize that gender is different from biological sex.
Can you repeat that one again, please?
Surely. Gender is the psychological, social, and cultural aspects of being male or female. And we're going to unpack that one a lot more later because it's really important that you realize that gender is bound in social and cultural contexts, whereas that's different from biological sex. Biological sex is as male or female, typically in reference to chromosomes, gonads, sex hormones, and internal reproductive anatomy and external genitalia. I will go ahead and say all of those words because I love saying gonads and genitalia. Okay, as male or female, so the blanks are basically, it's in reference to your chromosomes, gonads, it's not funny, grow up, I'm just kidding, sex hormones, internal reproductive anatomy, and external genitalia. Now, most of you, this is very clear what your biological sex is. There's a small percentage of people where there's ambiguous genitalia. I won't be addressing that very much because it's not very prevalent at all. But it is definitely something that people deal with and experience. There is also sometimes where people present as a woman externally. They have secondary sex characteristics and primary sex characteristics, but their chromosomes might be wrong. So women have 2 X chromosomes, and men have an X and a Y chromosome. So we're not going to go much into 2 of those because that's a pretty small margin of the population, like super small. So then we've got this longer idea of gender identity versus gender expression. Those are 2 different things. For this one, I really want you to try and listen to what I'm saying and then worry about the blanks. The reason I gave you blanks is because I really wanted you to have a full definition and not just have to paraphrase, but sometimes I fear that with blanks you're so focused on getting the blanks that you're not even thinking about what I'm saying. So listen to me, and I promise we'll go back through them. So gender identity is totally internal. Gender identity is how you experience or think about yourself. So those are those first blanks. So I, again, using myself as an example, I have always experienced myself internally as a woman. I've always thought as a woman. I never questioned whether or not I was a man. I have experienced myself as pretty feminine. That's how I think. That is my gender identity. But it's how people think of themselves as male, female, or some combination thereof, or neither. which I'll get to here in a moment. We're going to move into kind of thinking a little bit about gender as more of a spectrum and less as a binary. Binary meaning I am a male or I am a female. And a spectrum, meaning that there's some in between, which I'll address in a moment. So that includes how masculine or feminine a person feels. That's a part of this gender identity thing. So again, gender identity is a different thing than biological sex. So it's how masculine or feminine a person feels. So that's all the gender identity stuff. Gender identity is largely internal. It's how I think about myself and how I interact with the world. But this is different than gender expression. Gender expression is the external appearance of one's gender identity. So that's what I show to the world. Usually expressed through behavior, clothing, haircut, or voice, which may or may not conform to socially defined behaviors and characteristics typically associated with being either masculine or feminine. So those are different because gender identity is what I am in my brain, and gender expression is what you guys all see. I'll repeat for gender expression. It's the external appearance of one's gender identity, usually expressed through behavior, It may or may not conform to socially defined behaviors or characteristics typically associated with being either masculine or feminine. So using myself again as an example, I communicated my gender identity is largely feminine for the most part. And my gender expression today, I'm wearing a dress and I have makeup on and I'm using gestures that are maybe more feminine. I haven't really studied my gestures or what is normal. But I'm pretty much overall expressing myself as a woman. My voice is a woman's voice, and so it's all an external thing. Now, that could get more ambiguous because most days, I wear jeans and a t-shirt and an outfit that you could put on a man, and for a large part would look pretty much the same sort of if he was wearing, maybe the male counterpart of the outfit or whatever. So our culture has moved to where women can have a gender expression that is a little bit more masculine, and it's still really socially acceptable, which I will also get to later, and I'm so excited for this. Oh, okay. So I have to define the terms. You have to start with the terms. You got to lay the groundwork. Okay. So then there's gender role. So many gender words. A gender role is the adoptions of cultural expectations for maleness and femaleness. Most of your blanks are like man, woman. So it's adoptions of cultural expectations. So a gender role today might be that as a woman, when I have a child, it is our culture's expectation that I will stay home for at least the first year or so taking care of my child. That's like a gender role that I think for the most part is pretty well accepted. No one would cast aspersions or look down on me if I wanted to stay home with my infant child. So that is a gender role that I can choose to ascribe to. Okay, so that is all gender stuff. Now that is really different from and not necessarily related to the next one, which is sexual orientation. Something that I really want to make sure that you get out of my talk this evening is that sexual orientation and gender are not always related at all. So sexual orientation is a person's sexual identity, is your blank, sexual identity, in relation to the gender to which they are attracted. So that's the fact of being heterosexual, homosexual, or bisexual. Which again, and I think Melissa will address this too, we're also going to talk about in a moment, also being more on a spectrum than as binary as all of that. So it's a person's sexual identity in relation to the gender which they're attracted, the fact of being heterosexual, homosexual, or bisexual. It is the emotional, romantic, or sexual attraction to other people. So the reason that I chose to lay that out, I actually have more terms. I just put my little guy there first. All right, next one, so many terms. You're going to be vocabulary wizards and you can make flashcards, but then it's useless when someone tells you that they are this because of this. So people use terms how they want to. So transgender, the definition that I'm going to be using for transgender is an umbrella term for the many ways people might experience and or present and express or live out their gender identities differently from people whose sense of gender... I'll go back and say all the blanks. Gender identities differently from people whose sense of gender identity is congruent with one's biological sex. So to be transgender, that's an umbrella term that encompasses a lot of things. And for the sake of time and for the sake of what we're trying to accomplish this evening, I'm not going to get into all of those, but I am going to address transgenderism at large. So again, it's an umbrella term for the many ways people might experience and or present and express or live out their gender identities differently from people whose sense of gender identities is congruent with one's biological sex. So it is essentially if as you know, I was born biologically female, if as I grew up into adolescence, I was experiencing the sense of being far more masculine and like a man than like my biological sex being female. Yes?
I think there's a typo on this.
Oh no. Is it hard to understand? You think you got it? What?
If you just delete like 8 words, it works.
Then delete the 8 words. Whatever you need. But basically just get that transgender is when your biological, physical sex does not align with what you are experiencing. Does that make sense? With what you're experiencing mentally or what you choose to live out. That's basically what you need to know. Is that clear? I'm sorry about the mix-up.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Surely.
So, like, your experience is different than your biological, right?
That's correct.
Internal is different than external.
That's correct. In fact, will you go ahead and click to the next thing? I'm going to come back to these blanks. So this is the genderbread person. And this has actually proven to be a really neat resource for me as I kind of think through what some of these things mean. So this kind of breaks it down into gender identity, gender expression, biological sex, and then different attractions, sexual attraction and romantic attraction. This is in your packet. Some of the words might be hard to see though, so I'm going to kind of walk through it. So as you can see, the gender identity part is up in our brain. That's where we have this idea of identity, and it's on a spectrum. So for me, again, using myself, I identify as pretty strong under the womanness part. He kind of uses, this is all very simplified. You need to understand that. This is to help people like the general masses understand the experience of a trans person and really of yourself, because all of you subscribe to some sort of gender roles. So my gender identity, now I am pretty far along on the womanness one, but I also feel pretty masculine at times. There are things that I subscribe to. I'm pretty ambitious. I really like, math, things that are traditionally more masculine. I like leadership roles. I like to speak up. Some of those are considered in our culture pretty masculine. So it's kind of along this spectrum. So those of you who are men, may experience, a higher degree of femininity. Some people may experience like, I feel like I'm really neither. I don't really identify with either. And that's a part of this spectrum as well, as maybe you're a man who doesn't necessarily feel super masculine, but you don't really feel feminine either. The next one is gender expression, which again is just what I'm going to show to the world, and it's along a continuum. So there might be a woman who feels like super woman on the inside. She knows she's a woman. She wants to do things that women do, but she doesn't dress super feminine. She might, never wear makeup. She's got, baggy jeans and, whatever every day, and that's kind of her deal. But then biological sex, she is like 100%, female. So then with the trans situation, that's where that gets kind of different. So biologically, again, the biological sex might be that they are 100% a man. Their chromosomes, all of them line up. Everything is as it should be. But their identity and what they're experiencing mentally and psychologically is not congruent with what their biological sex is. So this is a really neat resource, and I like that it presents these things on a spectrum and on a continuum, because this is communicating something about the fact that gender is not necessarily a list of things that you need to subscribe to, and if you don't subscribe to them, then you're broken, or you're really wrong, or something is bad, or inherently just like ugly about you, which I'll get to again a little bit more later. So this is, I think, a really neat resource for you to be able to kind of look at what I'm meaning with some of these terms, if that makes sense. The next term that was totally new to me in my research was cisgender. Most of you are likely cisgender, which is a word to contrast with transgender and to signify that one's psychological and emotional experience of gender identity is congruent with your biological sex. So most people grow up cisgender. Their psychological and emotional experience is the same as what they've got going on with their gonads. You know what I'm saying? It's all the same. Totally works out for them. So that's cisgender. So when I say that, I wanted to clarify that because I felt like that was a word that I came across a lot when I was researching, and I had no idea what it was. So, if this is an area of interest for you, that's a term that's helpful. Yes. I'm so sorry. I'll slow down. Thank you for saying that. So cisgender is a word to contrast with transgender and to signify that one's psychological and emotional experience of gender identity is congruent with one's biological sex. Cool. Okay, the last term that I'm going to define is feminism. Yeah, we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about feminism because you may support it and you don't even know what it means. So feminism is the advocacy of advocacy is your blank. The advocacy of women's rights on the grounds of political, social, and economic equality to men. Which I think is something we can all get behind. Hopefully. But maybe not. Maybe you have reasons biblically. I would love to talk to you. Okay. So I think we covered all of the... Cool. Okay. So now that we've unpacked some of those terms, I want to explain again my goals for talking to you about gender tonight. Now that we've gone through all of those terms, and I think we're on the same page about what I say when I mean, yeah, that took a lot longer than I meant. I just want to help you think like a Christian. In a world that's communicating a lot about what it means to be a human, and what it means to be a man, and what it means to be a woman, and what it means to be sexual, how do we as Christians navigate our culture? How do we navigate what it means to be a female Christian person? How do we navigate what it means to be a male Christian person? And how do I work within a culture that, in a way that points people to the gospel? How do you work within your culture that is communicating lots of different narratives and messages? And how do I become a thoughtful person who doesn't just adopt the ideologies of our secular culture or from our church culture? Will you go to the next slide? So, and click again. Okay, so on when we did SSI, and it was here, I don't know if you can read that because of the light, but one of the questions when the students from Washington came to reach out here, one of the questions was what issues would Jesus vote for? And this was an answer of a Christian student. It said all moral issues, abortion, homosexuality, and transgender. He would vote against these. Not actually sure where you can vote against transgender, but this is an assumption over and over and over again on the internet. Lots of people who read the Bible believe that God is very, very against transgender people and very against any expression of masculinity or femininity that does not subscribe to what the Bible says about those things. I can't find a lot of what the Bible says, but we'll get to that in a moment. And then click again. So we have to work against our Christian assumptions, and we have to work against our cultural assumptions. This is what our culture believes is masculine and feminine. Yeah. Yes. That is what they believe. You guys love that. But I have so much better to tell you about history. Okay. So, will you click? Yeah. I'll email that out to you. Just to be clear, that's something I don't want you to believe. So, that's your biggest takeaway. We have got problems. But that is our cultural narrative. And it's funny. For sure, that's funny. When I saw it, I was like, I'm putting that in there. That is ridiculous. But the thing about that is actually truly sad is that not going to work. They're going to fall asleep. I'm not that good. You got to keep the lights up. Yep. That's the opposite of good, I think. Okay, great. The problem with both of these narratives is that they're not biblical and they don't work. And our culture needs a message that is saturated with life. And I believe that Jesus wants to give life to our gender identities. Oh, please stay away. Yikes. Okay, so I'm going to start with a little bit of trivia for you, some fun facts. And I have blanks, which was very stupid. Ignore the first blanks. Don't even worry about them. It's numbers. You don't even care. I'm just going to give you a little bit of trivia about how gender has changed over time and cross-culturally. So in 1967, 19% of females aged 18 to 24 were enrolled in college, compared to 33% of males, which kind of aligns with this, like, men care more about being smart, blah, blah, blah. But in 2008, 40% of females aged 18 to 24 were enrolled in college, compared to 35% of males. Male enrollment has stayed somewhat steady since then, but female enrollment has almost doubled in 20 years. So women are going to school and caring about their education. In June, this is my favorite one. In June 1918, Earnshaw's Infants Department Store said the generally accepted rule is pink for the boys and blue for the girls. The reason is that pink, being a more decided and stronger color, is more suitable for the boy, while blue, which is more delicate and dainty, is prettier for the girl. So that up on the top right is a picture of a young boy dressed in a pink dress. And that down there is a paper doll from the 1920s, and that's a little boy baby. And he's got frilly collars and little dresses that are pink and yellow. A class, these are not blanks, so just listen to me. A class I've been listening to about gender from Regent Seminary in Vancouver explores gender and religion and politics in the late 18th century to mid-19th century Britain. And before the 1800s, women were considered more sexually predatorial and considered to have a larger sexual appetite than men. Far and away, it was believed that women were more sexual, would lure you into her traps sexually, not men. High-heeled shoes started as fashion statements for high-class men. Like the king up there, he's wearing heels, which you totally can't see, but they're heels, and they're beautiful. That's King Louis XIV. And that was like a staple of his wardrobe, was these red heels. Loved them, wore them all the time. But after the French and American Revolution and democracy became, what we really wanted, what the people wanted, fashion changed, and towering over people because of democracy wasn't as ideal. So men stopped wearing them as much in government. This is really interesting. The importance of marriage among young women and children. The percent of people who said that having a successful marriage is one of the most important things. In 1997, 28% of young women said this, and 35% of young men said this. That having a successful marriage is one of the most important things. Where in 2010, the percent of young women went up, but the percent of young men went down. It's kind of interesting. I thought it was an interesting little fact for you. So cross-culturally, so these are some different gender norms across the globe. At 4 million people, the Minangkabau of West Sumatra, Indonesia, are the largest known matrilineal society today, meaning that women are like the head of the society, matrilineal. In addition to tribal law requiring all clan property to be held and bequeathed from mother to daughter, the Minangkabau firmly believe the mother to be the most important person in society. So things are different in different places. Another one is I'm sorry I'm butchering these names, but the Nagavisi live in South island of West New Guinea, and the women are involved in the leadership ceremonies, and they take the most pride in working the land entitled to them. A researcher observed that when it comes to marriage, the Nagavisi woman held a gardening and shared sexuality as equal importance, and their marriage is not institutionalized. If a couple is seen together and they sleep together and the man assists the woman in her garden, for all intents and purposes, they're considered married. The man assists the woman. So the women are the leaders, and the man kind of assists them in their gardening, which is very sweet. I think, we should be more like that. Okay. And then according to a study, this is something I heard on Freakonomics, but a study conducted by a behavioral economist from UC San Diego, competitiveness is a more nurtured trait than a nature trait. In a patriarchal society in Tanzania, men were far more competitive than women. While in the matrilineal society known as the Kasi people in northeast India, women are even more competitive than the Tanzanian men. So they did a study where they had a tennis ball and some buckets, and they had to throw the tennis ball. They had 10 tennis balls to throw into a bucket, and for every successful bucket they made, they got $1. Or they could choose to say you have a competitor that's just around the corner out of your sight. For every one you make in the bucket, you get $3 if you get more in the bucket than the person around the corner. And they found that in Tanzania, it was something like 52% of the men were like, yes, I want to do that, absolutely. The women wouldn't even compete. They were like, as if, whatever, I got more important things to do. But then they did the same thing to the Kasi people, and it was like 56% of the women were like, we'll do it. So they were more competitive than the men elsewhere. So that's not a trait that's just inherently feminine or masculine. So the bottom line with some of these things, I hope that you're getting out of this, is that gender roles are cultural and time-bound. Gender roles are cultural and time-bound. Even just these pictures. That's a little boy in a beautiful, beautiful pink dress. And that is a paper doll of a young boy with dresses and frilly collars, and they're very beautiful. And that is a man wearing high heels. I hope that communicates too. That's something that you get, that gender is different for different times and in different cultures. So I am going to give you a very brief history of how we got to where we are with gender roles and norms, okay? And this is going to be brief, and I want you to largely listen. I'm going to try to tell you like a story so that you understand that your gender assumptions did not come from nowhere. What you believe about what is masculine and what is feminine did not come from nowhere at all. And I'm going to fly through this. If you could click and click again. Okay, so the Industrial Revolution played a large part in what we believe about gender, which was one of the weirdest things that I have heard or found out. Basically, the Industrial Revolution happened between 1760 and sometime between 1820 or 1840. And it was a time when mass production and factory work became the norm, and major shifts culturally happened as a result. Something that I want you to remember is that these shifts in gender roles and gender identities was also a class issue. The lower working class were not thinking as much about gender and what a man does and what a woman does as the middle class and upper class. This is a class issue just as much as it is a man and woman issue. So for centuries before the Industrial Revolution, families were producers, not consumers. Meaning, they ate what they farmed and they wore what they made, and that the economy was based on a mutuality and a common wage. So if me and my husband and our kids have a farm and I decide that I'm not going to feed the chickens or make the clothes or whatever, then we have a problem. Everyone has a problem. And if my husband decides that he's not going to slaughter the cows and farm and work the land, then we all have a problem. So it's very much based on a mutual benefit. But what happened when the Industrial Revolution came is that people were pushed out of the home and into the factory, and there developed this ideal of a single bread earner. So the man was out working in the factory and the woman was supposed to stay home. Now, in the cases where women were out of the home and they were out working, women were further subjected because the wage inequality became a thing. But in the cases where it was the ideal, where there was a single breadwinner, there became what was called separate spheres. which for the record, all of this is like theory. It's not a hard science. But separate spheres is a theory that makes a lot of sense to me in thinking through all of this. But basically, what happened there is that men were doing their thing outside of the home and women were doing their thing inside of the home. And this became the model to which people aspired. And that still affects us today. And this model is called the Victorian home, if you'll click for me. And the Victorian home really continued and really fostered this separate spheres idea. It's called the Victorian home because Queen Victoria was in power at the time, and she really, really liked separate spheres. She was all about separate spheres for men and a woman. For man and woman. And that became divinized. That became seen as like, this is holy and right before God. This is good. This is awesome. There's a piece of literature written in 1966 called The Cult of True Womanhood. And it's a piece written by historian Barbara Welters, not Barbara Walters. And it explains the attributes of true womanhood by which a woman judged herself and was judged by her husband, her neighbors, and society could be divided into 4 cardinal virtues: piety, purity, submissiveness, and domesticity. Put them all together and it's spelled mother, daughter, sister, wife, woman. Without them, no matter where there was fame, achievement, or wealth, all was ashes. With them, she was promised happiness and power. So that's kind of an idea that still has affected us today. This idea, like, all of this sounds very familiar. And this happened in the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s. So I'm going to skip fast forward a little bit through history to the feminist movement. If you don't mind clicking for me. I thought this was a pretty cool example, basically, of the 3 waves of feminism. The first wave of feminism was largely focused on women's suffrage. It was political. So it started in the UK, and it basically granted and gained women the right to vote. Again, this was totally a class thing, because it was white women, largely. So you've heard of Sojourner Truth saying, "Ain't I a woman?" and also fighting for the right of black women to vote. The second wave of feminism arose around the 60s, and this was focused largely on sexual issues, and this included more minorities than the first wave. It largely rejected beauty ideals and everything Victorian. So this is this feminist kind of like, I don't have to shave my armpits, I don't have to do anything, I can do anything, I am woman, hear me roar. Women's subjugation and male superiority was problematic and wrong, and they are equal, and they had more than just sexy housewives. And so it was during this wave that we had the American Equal Rights Amendment, which is awesome, demanding equal rights regardless of sex. So the third wave of feminism is sort of where we're at right now. It began in the mid-90s and it was informed by postmodern thinking, largely. In this phase, many constructs were de-established, including the notions of universal womanhood, body, gender, sexuality, and it is basically this idea, it kind of shows it over here too, it's basically like rejecting all, like they want to be pretty gender neutral. This kind of gets into this extreme sense of like, almost like women are superior, we shouldn't even have gender is messed up, and that's kind of where we're at now with the feminist movement. I'm sorry, I'm really trying to make sure that you get all of this information, but it's so much, and I just decided to prepare so much, but I'm trying to be on time. The next slide, if we could. So then there's this postmodernism, which is kind of where we're at a little bit right now. There's some cartoons up there. That's Calvin and Hobbes. What important event took place on December 16th, 1773? I do not believe in linear time. There is no past and future. All is one in existence. In the temporal sense is illusory. This question, therefore, is meaningless and impossible to answer. When in doubt, deny all terms and definitions. And then this one is basically a guy, he's like, you're standing on my neck. And he's like, what is the neck though? Am I actually here? And he's like, yeah, but you're still standing on my neck. And that is a clip from a skit on Saturday Night Live that I like a lot, where Elizabeth Banks on the left is in this ridiculous theater skit, and she's like, sir, do you think I'm a girl or a boy? And he's like, based on how this is going so far, I'm going to guess you're a boy. She's like, actually, could you just say that I'm a girl? And then he's like, you're a girl. She's like, wrong, I'm a boy. So ridiculous. But that is postmodernism. There's no absolute truth. There's no gender binaries. Nothing is real. Nothing is fixed. Nothing is pure. And nothing is objective. That's postmodernism. I'm skipping this next part. Basically, here's what I want you to know, too. There is also these debates about science, nature versus nurture. What is masculine? What is feminine? Here's what I want you to get out of that. It depends on if you talk to Brad or you talk to Garrett, what actual brain differences are between men and women. Now, biologically, obviously, I communicated there are differences hormonally, there are differences in our, anatomy and all sorts of things. But research isn't great on what actual differences there are between men and women, because you cannot extract a person from culture, which is good. That's great. Culture is not bad, and I don't want you to get that out of what I'm saying. The whole idea, though, is, do I like getting pretty and wearing makeup and carrying babies because my mom was like, wear makeup, hold babies? Or was it because I came out of the womb like, give me some lipstick? We're just not, we're not sure. We don't know. There are some scientists who say that women have more connections between the hemispheres of their brain, which I totally believe. So women are better at multitasking and being relational while working, which I totally think is true, because Matt doesn't even know I'm making a joke right now because he's in work mode filling in the blank. So it's just different people disagree. Some people say that my brain is just as different from Matt's brain as my brain is different from Danielle's brain. It's hard to say. So nature versus nurture is an important debate that started a way long time ago. We're still figuring it out. And I think the good answer is it's both. It's nature and it's nurture. So what are 21st century gender beliefs? They're all over the place. You guys know a lot of them. I'm not going to go into telling you what you already know, because all of you, for the most part, I can tell what biological sex most of you are, and it's not because I have X-ray vision and can see under your underpants. It's because of how you are dressing. You subscribe to these gender roles. So to the important part, what does Scripture say about gender? What does Scripture say about gender? But before we talk about what Scripture must say about gender, that is the wrong question to approach Scripture with. We must always start with the two questions: who is God and what is a human being? That is where we have to start. Because if you start looking for a proof text about what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman, you will be wrong. Would you mind clicking for me? Oh boy. Okay, so we're going to start with Genesis 1 through 3. If I approach Genesis to understand gender, I will likely get it wrong. Okay, we've got to start with who is God. And then what is a human being? We've got to look at the larger context. So Genesis 1 and 2 shows us what humanity looks like before the fall. How humans related to God, how humans related to each other, and to creation. And here's what we can deduce from Genesis 1 and 2. Humans are the focal point of the created order. It was all designed for those humans. We're created from dust, so we're one with creation, but then we're also made in the image of God. We have a delegated joint authority from God. Adam and Eve were given a joint authority. The emphasis was on kinship and on sharing, and it was not on a hierarchy. We see that it was not good for man to be alone, so he was given a helper in Eve. And what's very interesting is that the Hebrew word for helper used there is exclusively, almost exclusively, I think there's one other time where it's not, but almost exclusively in the Old Testament used to refer to when God helps people. So, this idea that woman was inferior to man because she was to help man is at a fundamental level wrong. Because we do not believe that because God helps humanity, that somehow humanity is better than God. That's objectively wrong and a bad way of reading the text. The human of Genesis 1 does not have a soul. They are a soul, and they are also of the earth. They're not a collection of bits. It's one big, complicated person. The body is a part of who we are, which affects how we think about the transgender thing, which I'll get to. Because what do we do when our body doesn't line up with our mind? But we are one complicated person. It is not until Genesis 3, after the humans decide that they want to be like God, that they disobey Him and His authority, that the relationships between man and woman get murky and complicated. It introduced shame and it introduced individualism. Now, as a result of the fall, man and woman fight for control and power over one another. Because we see in Genesis 3 that man started to define woman in terms of her role, not in terms of her personhood. But the fallen reality is not what God intended or wanted, nor is it prescriptive. Look at the trajectory. A kingdom where the king is a servant leader and lays down his life for his subjects. There will be neither male nor female before Christ. We need to remember that Old Testament law does not equal the Genesis 1 and 2 vision. And Jesus affirms that. The Old Testament law does not equal the vision that God had for creation. So fast forwarding a few thousand years, at the time of Jesus, there was a really diverse approach to viewing women. So you need to remember that. There were people who believed who would thank God that they weren't made a woman. They would thank God in their prayers daily that they weren't made a woman. But also, there were those Jews who believed that to be a mother was one of the greatest things of all. One of the greatest things we could be as a human. We make a mistake when we think that Jews were like He-Man woman haters and Christians got it right and they loved women. Because Jews had really good things that they believed about women, but for every good there was a bad. There was some challenging things. So in the Gospels, we'll take a look at what Jesus believed about women. Women play a really prominent role and were clearly really important to Jesus. And they were more than their gender norms, and they were certainly very important characters in the gospel story. So I'm sorry, I'm going to try to go through this pretty quickly for sake of time, but I'm going to try to hit the really, really high points of what I want you to get. I'm going, Garrett. I see you. I'm going. 4 women are in the genealogy of Jesus. 4 women are in the genealogy of Jesus. One of whom was a prostitute, one had an illicit affair, and one was a Moabite. 4 women in the genealogy. Elizabeth was the first person to be filled with the Spirit. That's in Luke. Oh, cool. I didn't write that down. In Luke 2, starting in verse 41. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the baby leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. Then we see Anna, who was a prophetess in the temple. She was a prophetess in the temple. Luke 2:46. There was also a prophet Anna, the daughter of Penuel of the tribe of Asher. She was very old. She lived with her husband 7 years after marriage and then was a widow until she was 84. She never left the temple but worshipped night and day, fasting and praying. Coming up to them at that very moment, she gave thanks to God and spoke about the child to all who were looking forward to the redemption of Jerusalem. The only person who bested Jesus was a Gentile woman. The only person in a rhetorical encounter with Jesus who was able to best him was a Gentile woman. That's in Mark 7, verse 24. Yes. Yeah, so basically she kind of was able to battle with him a bit with words. He essentially called her a dog, and she contested by saying, but doesn't a dog even get to eat the crumbs from under the table? So the Pharisees tried to really have a battle of wits with him, and they often or always failed. And the only person who was able to kind of be like, well, Jesus, and reason with him and kind of best him in this argument was not only a woman, but a Gentile woman. In the story of the widow's mite in Mark 12, Jesus elevates the widow's faith while also condemning a system that would put her in such a position. Not only does he elevate the woman, but he condemns a system that would put a widow in a position where she only had 2 coins to give. This one is really cool and probably my favorite. Martha confesses Jesus as Lord in an interaction that looks a lot like Peter's confession of his lordship. In John 11:25-27, Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. In John 6:68, Peter answered him, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and to know that you are the Holy One of God. I do not believe that was an accident. I believe that was very intentional, that John included two professions of Jesus' lordship, one by a man and one by a woman. The first to see the risen Lord at the empty tomb were women, which is a big deal. Women were important to Jesus' ministry. Jesus was progressive in his view of women while still working within the cultural context of the time period. Jesus was progressive, but he still worked within the cultural context. And that women weren't among the 12 disciples, but there were women who were disciples and followed him and were a part of his itinerant group. And he did not overturn explicitly all of the power struggles and the male hierarchy, but a close reading of Scripture reveals a subversive teacher who challenged the assumptions of the day about gender. In Acts and in letters, we see that women were doing meaningful ministry. We see that in Acts 16 and 18, in Philippians 4, verses 2 and 3. Lydia is doing ministry in Acts 16. The house that Paul is invited to is both Priscilla and Aquila's, which was a big deal that he called it the woman's house and the man's house. In Galatians, the value of a person based upon distinctions of race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and gender is obliterated. In Genesis 3:26. So in Christ you are all children of God through faith. For all of you who were baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free. There is neither male nor female, and you are all one in Jesus Christ. In Ephesians 5, men are called into submission in a very male-oriented society. Ephesians 5, a good reading of it, is way more radical for men of that day than women of that day. Where a man was the head and he was in charge, to be told to submit to his wife is very radical. Just so you know, there's a couple of challenging texts for sure as we explore gender in the New Testament. One is 1 Corinthians 11, 2-16. One of the weirdest texts, I think, in all of our scriptures. Not going to unpack it because A, I don't have time, and B, I wouldn't do it if I did. So that's a really complicated text. Basically, what a lot of scholars believe is that women are overstepping and seeing their new equality as something to then abuse, and were abusing it within the congregation. They were taking their mutuality too far. This is about head coverings and stuff. Taking their mutuality too far, and they were overlooking the differences between men and women, and that became problematic. In 1 Timothy 2:11 and 12, we see that there were women who were there told to be silent. But if you look at the historical context of what was going on, there were women who were leading people away from the gospel. They were communicating things that were not true. And it was really, really challenging to the church that Paul was writing to Timothy about that church. So, what is biblical masculinity and femininity? What is it? What does it look like? I'm going to answer that for you so briefly. Basically, I think there's a caution in using the Old Testament because the Old Testament narrative is scenic, succinct, and subtle. So when you look at the Old Testament, it's scenic. It's like when you watch a movie, it's not explaining to you what every character is thinking. You just see what is happening. It's succinct in that it's very brief. It's usually a pretty condensed thing. They're not going to go to the ins and outs of everything that's ever talked about. And it's subtle. It's very nuanced. So when we look at descriptions of people, we need to keep that in mind. Descriptions of different people looking for masculinity and femininity. We need to be really careful to not take incredibly rigid, solid stands on something that is not mentioned that often in Scripture at all. Masculinity and femininity is not talked about that often in Scripture, like at all. So we need to be really careful to take these really hard and fast stands on it. Because we are first both called to be like Jesus. Period. Both men and women are called into submission to one another and to fruitful lives. It's clear that both man and woman were made in the image of God and that both are good. We need to remember, too, that our culture is not evil. Culture is not bad. As Christians, we are called to be in the world, but not of the world. And Scripture was written in culture. So we need to interpret it through its cultural lens and interpret it outward in our cultural lens. So how much should we as Christians work within our cultural framework? What brings life to people? That is the question. What is going to bring people life? Out of oppressive societal roles. So what's going to bring people life out of these societal roles? And what's going to distract people from the life that they are given in Christ? Do not use your freedom as an excuse to sin. This is a big one. Denying social norms just to be bold and weird and not to show people Jesus is not submissive and it's not edifying to others. So I want to encourage you to really think about that. As you wrestle with and think about your masculinity or femininity, think about that. Our concern is not to be feminist, and our concern is not to maintain first century norms. We want to maintain the integrity of the gospel, and our goal as men and our goal as women is first and foremost to be like Christ to our world. I'm going to say something very quickly about the transgender issue, if I can have 5 minutes. We need to think about this with great care and with empathy. This is not a simple or a cut and dry issue at all. Will you click to the next one? Is there a spot for this on your packet? Okay, great. It is not something that we can completely understand just by reading about. I'm going to go through these 3 frameworks super quickly. These are just some ways that the church thinks about this and how I think we should move to think about this. One is the integrity framework. The integrity framework identifies the phenomenon of gender incongruence as confusing the sacredness of maleness and femaleness. So this basically sees sex and gender as unchangeable and an essential aspect to our personhood. And this is something that most Christians, I think, most conservative Christians really tend towards. So the pro of this one is that it supports the fact that there is a creational difference between men and women. And that's good. That's good that they support that. But there are a lot of cons. It does not address how we think about gender in the context of a fallen world, because the fall distorts both physical and cultural expressions of gender. So it really misses that. And it promotes the view that gender and sexuality were designed in a particular manner for a particular purpose, and it implies a universality and stability that disconnects the constant shifting and diversity that we observe and experience. So I'd caution us away from that one. Then there's the disability framework, which basically says that gender incongruence is a reflection of a fallen world, and the condition is a disability. It's a non-moral reality to be addressed with compassion. So the question arises, how should we respond to a condition with reference to the created order, the reality of the fall, and the hope of restoration? The con to this one is that it doesn't provide meaningful identity for the individual and community support that is found in the next one, the diversity framework. The diversity framework, I think, is where our culture is at largely right now. It says that trans people reflect an identity and a culture to be celebrated as an expression of diversity. I'm going to read you this quote and then explain an integrated framework. To the extent that Christians want to have any kind of meaningful discussion of common ground and genuine differences, there is a need for the development of cognitive complexity, which includes the capacity to see through the eyes of others. No one framework will likely be sufficient for a truly comprehensive Christian engagement. So I suggest we move to an integrated framework. This takes the best of all 3 ways of looking at it. It examines what God did in creation and does the best it can to maintain and uphold the integrity of the differences in the created woman and man. And that's good. And it also takes into account the physical resurrection of Christ, which shows us that there is importance to our physical body, which is also good. And then it also treats the person with the compassion and care that the disability framework allows for. There's something that is broken and that is not right and cause for sorrow and empathy. It speaks to identity and it validates a person's experience. What you are experiencing is real. And it recognizes that this is not a matter of a person willfully disobeying God. We must seek first to understand. And finally, it allows for the type of belonging and community that the diversity framework has within it. We need to integrate people dealing with this into our community however best we can. So that is just a brief introduction on gender. I'm sorry, that was pretty fast. An hour goes by really quickly. We're going to move on to our next portion. I would really encourage you, if you have any questions about this, if you are dealing with any difficulties in how you process your own gender identity, if there was something that I said that was confusing or misleading or anything like that, I would love to talk to you during dinner, or any of our ministers here would love to talk to you. We really want to be a place where you can come and really find community in your battles with your gender identity.
As our next readers are making their way down, I just want to reiterate, this is a tough issue. Finding gender values in Scripture is certainly something we can do. And if you go out and read and pick up Captivating or Wild at Heart or something, you can find people who are going to go and look. The challenge is there's very little in the Scripture that's very normative, and also often what we do is we pick our, here's my view of what it means to be a man, and here's my view of what it means to be a woman, and then I go find stories and examples in the Scripture that back that up. So who do we usually pick? King David for the men, and we're all warriors and stuff. But again, we're sort of reinforcing our own viewpoint on that, and there would be plenty of men that didn't fight any battles or do anything in any way that we don't look at. And so a lot of times we do this with Scripture. We go looking for what we already kind of believe, and it's very challenging. There's no good reason to use King David as our model for manhood. He was a very troubled man. And Jesus, who is our model for, humanhood in general, but did come as a man, is very rarely used in any of the resources on biblical masculinity. It's very strange. We don't really like him as much. We want a warrior, but again, I think that's because we already see ourselves or see manhood in that way. So I loved what Sarah shared just about the way these things change over time. 100 years ago, pink was a boy's color and blue was a girl's color. And yet those things just seem like obvious to us because we grew up with them. Okay, I just want to remind us, since so many of us are coming in late, and this is really important for these testimonies, the people who are reading these testimonies are providing the voice, but this is not their story. And so we've had different students, they're here tonight, or at least I assume they are, I don't know who they all are, who have written these stories, but they're members of our community actively right now. They've written their story, but just due to the sensitive nature, someone else is going to step up and deliver that story to us. So Rhett and then Kaylee are going to share the next ones with us.
I suppressed my emotions and thoughts concerning my same-sex attraction tendencies for most of my life. I always assumed I would grow out of it. I didn't have the best father figure growing up, and I never really knew how to relate to other guys. This caused problems during my adolescent and preteen years because I seemed different to other guys, which made going to school one of the hardest things I've ever experienced. Every day I was tormented and called a multitude of names. I was afraid of the small things, such as simply walking down the hallway, in fear of what other students would do or say. I specifically remember one instance when my 5th grade teacher found an earring on the classroom floor. When she asked the class whose it was, the entire class began to chant that it was mine. I also remember the first time I worked up the courage to ask a girl out in the 6th grade.
When I asked her, she just looked at me and said, "Why would I like someone that I thought was gay?" I had no friends and my home life was broken. My parents were distant due to their own issues, which made me uncomfortable talking about the problems I faced at school, which created a dark place and allowed no outlet for the sexual thoughts I was struggling with. How could I possibly get help for the things I was struggling with if it seemed that everyone either already hated me or would come to hate me if I ever made a cry for help? So I didn't. I struggled with my sexual identity for years, not saying a word to anyone. Even my peers at the church I attended growing up called me awful names. I came to believe that my family, peers, Christians, and even God had rejected me. Severely depressed and full of hatred for myself, I decided to run from God. During high school, I decided to embrace these thoughts and struggles I had been dealing with. I started communicating with others dealing with the same struggles. Eventually, my family found out. That whole situation was rough. I remember one of my family members stating that they would rather be dead. It wasn't until I heard of Focus and got involved that I really felt God's love and grace. At first, I was afraid of sharing my struggle with my close friends in fear of our relationship changing or even our friendship ending. When I finally shared my burden with my close friends, I was embraced with so much love and respect, more than I had ever felt before. I even had one friend tell me that they also struggled with the same thing. My friendships had gotten so much deeper and meaningful to me since I decided to let the light shine on my struggles. I still grappled with the same issues greatly, but when I finally let my friends and mentors help carry my sin, the burden became much lighter. I now know that you are a new being in Christ, and you are no longer having to live by your old identity. If there is anyone in this room struggling with this issue, I urge you to let someone help you carry your burden. This is one of the very reasons that community exists.
I grew up in a world where sex was okay. It was the thing to do. Even in my home, where my family considered ourselves Christian, my mom was okay with us having sex with someone. She said, as long as you use protection. Church at the time wasn't any better. Whether religious or not, sex was normal. I wanted to be different. I wanted to wait until marriage to have sex, just as the ring I wore on my ring finger showed I would do. But then I met him. He was handsome, his voice was beautiful, and even his smell was intoxicating. He had already dated quite a few girlfriends before he met me, but he said he liked me because I was different. It took me a month to fall in love with him. To me, it was a beautiful thing, and just being with him was enough for me, but it wasn't enough for him. 3 months after we got together, I was given a choice. The choice was to have sex with him or risk losing him to another girl. He was everything to me, and all I wanted was for him to be happy. So we did it. On campus, in a small, open-roof brick building outside. It was cold. The ground was covered in dirt. After that, we did it again, more times than I can count, for the next couple of years. I never cared about the sex. All I wanted was him. But I was never enough for him. More than once, I was his second choice to another girl that he would start to like as he dated me. Still, I was okay with it. In my mind, whether he chose me or not was okay, because at least he would be happy. After all, I thought, isn't that what love is about? Wanting the other person's happiness? So I guess that was my first struggle, misunderstanding what love is. And in the end, the things that I did to make him happy because of that love. My second struggle was relationships. This was a relationship that at the time I wasn't aware of how it affected the people around me, especially my family. There were many times where I even put my relationship with him over them. Though my relationship with them is a lot better now, it is still something I regret today. I also didn't have many friends, and I was okay with that. My relationship with God was mainly him being there, while all I focused on was my boyfriend. I thought we would always be together. He would tell me he loved me, he would tell me he wanted to marry me, and I very much believed him. Then it ended. It was probably one of the most painful things I have ever experienced. It was like losing my other half. Even after it was over, I couldn't remember what my life before him was like. But he moved on, so I had to as well.
Then came the third struggle. I started a new relationship with God. It was one that was much more real than the time when it was just Him loving me. It was me learning what I had done, and how despite there not being any physical or health consequences I had to deal with, there were still consequences there. I couldn't forgive myself. I mean, how can God or anyone else love me for the things I have done? I couldn't see it. I felt like I was alone, that I was the only one who was struggling with this. I felt like I had to hide it from the people around me, especially my friends in Focus, or I would lose them too. I felt like I would be judged from everyone, and I even started to fear whatever dating relationship I may have in the future. I struggled with the idea that I really would be alone. But here's what God showed me. Though this isn't exactly how I experienced it, this is still what it was. I'm sitting in a room full of girls talking with each other. Then the question, what is a sexual sin that you have struggled with, is asked. When it's my turn, I tell them. I tell them about my ex-boyfriend and all I did just to make him happy because I loved him. And then I cry because I would think that there's no one here who could look at me the same. There was no one here who could love me now. But an arm hugs me, and the girls in the room are crying too. Not because they feel bad for me, but because they love me. Their tears are telling me that I am not alone, that I am loved not only by them, but by Him, by our Lord who truly loves us and forgives us, despite how much we may hate ourselves for the things we've done. To Him, we are first.
Good afternoon. I would like to point out that I also am female and am wearing a dress, but I have something I can clip the mic pack onto. So I just wanted to insult Sarah's gender issues there. I would also like to point out, as anybody who knows me knows, I tend to make a lot of awkward jokes when I'm nervous. Even as I was writing things, all these weird jokes just kept coming in here. And then I would edit through and try to take them all out. But hopefully you enjoy my awkward jokes if anything slips back in. So today I'm going to go through some of the things that our culture tells us about marriage and raise some questions about it. And so back on the awkward joke subject, if you could pull out your packet where it says a discussion on gender and sexuality, just add below that end marriage. And as we've experienced with gender, our culture can send us some pretty confusing messages. Between what the world says about marriage and what the Christian subculture might have said and the way that our parents might actually have lived things out, we've got a lot of confusing messages going on. I speak as a person who has changed and matured a lot in the ways that I've thought about marriage over the past decade. As I was looking around this room, I realized I was in here for freshman orientation just about 10 years ago. And so besides that pressing reality that I am no longer a college student really hitting me, it really hit me how much my views have changed. Because I don't think that I would have recognized myself thinking who I was a decade ago. My views of marriage as I was entering in as a freshman, I had 3 basic concepts of why people got married. The first one, I assumed that the primary reason that people got married is because they were knocked up. In part, I couldn't think why else people would subject themselves to that kind of sadness. Now, I realized that didn't explain all the marriages, and so my second theory was some people are really insecure, and so people just get into relationships because they need somebody to affirm them, and so they get into these relationships, and at some point they just want the weight of the legal system behind them. So that must be why they got married. And then I added a third reason. I should note that I definitely was not a Christian at the time and did not have much respect for them. And so I assumed everybody else was busy having sex and the Christians weren't. So they must be such horn dogs that they're just looking for somebody to marry. A lot of growing up to do. And as I got involved in a godly community, I started to learn how to think more seriously about this. And I was starting to see people getting into good, wholesome relationships that didn't fit those definitions. And I was seeing the way that as my friends were getting married, it was making them into far more interesting people. And again, I'm not sure why you laughed at that one. But I was seeing these beautiful things that God was doing through marriage, in spite of my cynicism about the institution. And so, in spite of my negative views of it, I was learning how to trust God, and eventually trusted God enough when He was leading me into a relationship with Justin. And so I might occasionally just point out Justin down here, again, to make me feel better about this. I certainly didn't have all the answers about what marriage was about, but I finally came to a place where I was okay with it. So again, don't expect any final, fully formed thoughts here. I'm just going to be bringing up a lot of the questions that I had along the way and some of the different things that I've seen people state about marriage, for better or worse. And so my philosophy on the blanks, most of the ones I give are very open-ended and I give you space to write. I've never been a good blank filler-inner. I tend to just want to write my thoughts along the way. So hopefully some of y'all can track with that. And then the first couple of statements I have are just kind of frameworks for thought, a few statements that I hope we can all agree on here. And so I'm going to go through those first few statements. And again, I hope we can agree on these. First off, our culture tells us a lot of things about marriage, most of which have a little bit of truth and a lot of wishful thinking. And you'll see this played out as I go through this later list of cultural beliefs about marriage. Because a lot of the challenge here is that our misconceptions do have a little bit of truth. That's what gives it this staying power. But then we blow it out of proportion. And then there's some things towards the end of the list that I would argue are almost entirely true. But again, we lose perspective and we elevate some things to being the most important thing, or try to say, like, this is what marriage is about, instead of saying that we don't have a single hard and fast answer here. Then the second one, as with gender roles, we have a tendency to take our cultural assumptions and then try to find scriptural support for it. So again, there's not great single verses on marriage, but there are a lot of things that can give us a good framework for how to treat each other, and a lot of things that we can find very constructive in our thinking. But when people try to take our American concept and then just find some proof text for it, we start running into problems. We are faced with difficult choices about how we live and what is good. And again, we have that tendency to bypass the difficult task of critically thinking and critically assessing our choices by instead taking what we already want to believe, what we already think is true, and then just trying to find that solid proof. Which, again, runs into big problems because of this next statement. Marriage in the Bible looks a lot different from modern marriage, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. When we talk about biblical marriage, we have to be pretty careful here. Which marriages in the Bible do you think are just great examples that you want to live out? Some of my favorite biblical marriages, of course, are in Deuteronomy. This is my freshman cynic still coming out. When you go to war against your enemies and the Lord your God delivers them into your hands, if you notice among the captives a beautiful woman, you may take her as your wife. I'm so excited about that one. Is that the marriage that we want? Is that the biblical marriage that we should base our relationships on? Or, of course, the classic rape a girl, pay the father 50 shekels, and you got yourself a wife? And I bring this up because this is the response you get from the larger culture if you try to simply appeal to biblical marriage. If you don't believe me, I can send you a link to a Huffington Post article that goes through all of those. But as we go out and interact with the larger culture, we have to be careful about our language. And so most importantly, we need to have a firm grounding on the essential truths and core ideas about who God is and who we are as His people. And with that in mind, even those verses in Deuteronomy that I like to laugh at, they still demonstrate what some call a redemptive movement hermeneutic. It was still better than the existing culture. Did it get to the ultimate goal of treating people as people? Not quite. But it was still better than what existed before. So that's one of the neat things that I think that God does, like when we see what Jesus did and the things He set in motion. He didn't instantly end slavery, but He set things in motion that did so. And we get to be part of that. We get to be the people who take what the world has corrupted and redeem it for good. But what sometimes we want to do is we want to go back 2,000 years, see what was written to a specific culture, and say, that is biblical marriage, and try to take that. So, at this point, I'm going to go through some of the beliefs that we, people, specifically Americans, have about marriage. And they're gathered from all over the place. Pop culture, Christian marriage advice books, conversation with a broad range of people, all the great things you read as a gender studies major. And it's not meant to be an all-inclusive list. But at this point, I should make fun of myself for having a gender studies degree, which means that I do officially know what the difference between boys and girls is. And so when Sarah's mentioning, like, if you want the nature-nurture debate, talk to Brad or Garrett, I'm the one that actually has the degree that could tell you... I wasn't expecting that response. Man. And of course, countless books have been written on this subject. Some of the books that I'll be referencing, there's a historian named Stephanie Kuntz who wrote a fantastic book titled Marriage, a History, From Obedience to Intimacy, or How Love Conquered Marriage. And so I'll quote from her throughout this. I also listed a few Christian books about marriage as the ones I find particularly helpful. That said, I think all of these books have this challenge, again, of being embedded in our culture. And so even some of the Christian books, I see this glaring American cultural bent to it. And so with all of these things, we need to learn to be critical thinkers. When we're reading the things that secular historians have written, one of the things that I love her view of history is she's very well documented on a lot of things. But sometimes when she starts talking about religious texts, I think, how do people get that conclusion out of it? So again, with all of these, we need to learn how to think critically. And then my final piece of introduction, the question to keep at the front of your mind through some of these thoughts is, does this view of marriage treat the other person like an object or like a person? I like the hmms on that one too. Didn't even give y'all a blank for that one. But it was a chapel thing from Regent College in which John Stackhouse was talking, and I love the title of this thing, How Modern Life Makes Us All Sociopaths. And one of the things he's addressing is just the way that our culture is leading. We have this tendency to use people and then love objects. And he reminds us that as disciples we are called to love people. But too often we start to love the objects and use the people. And even some of these views of marriage that I run across start to treat the other person involved as the object to fulfill my desires, my needs, my life goals, instead of viewing them as a person. So with that in mind, I'll get started on the first few on this list. Everybody gets married sometime. It's just what people do. Sometimes we view our lives kind of like the board game. So pretty much all of us got into our nice little plastic station wagons and positioned our cars towards the go to college. And we've picked up our life tiles, and we're all dreading that stop sign where you have to draw your career card and your salary card. And we're spinning that wheel, and we're hoping we don't knock it off too many times, unless you're the IT guy and you get really excited about that. And then you just, bam, hit that stop sign. Get married. It's just what people do. But in which aspects of our lives do we ever say, well, everybody else is doing it, so I'm going to do it? Can you think of a single area of your life where that works? Everybody else goes on vacation and has Netflix and whatever. But we bring that into our adult lives. We just act as if we have to do something. We've seen this deeply entrenched across societies, one of these things that leaderships and governments do to make sure that their population makes enough babies. One of the things that I was reading had to do back in Roman culture, specifically Caesar Augustus, the dude that issued the census that kicked off the trip to Bethlehem. He had this family values campaign, and he wanted the Roman people to have more babies. And so he was trying to promote marriage and promote children. And one of the ways that this was instituted in Rome at the time was inheritance laws. So you could only inherit money from your closest relatives if you didn't have children. So you could inherit from your parents if you were unmarried, didn't have children, fine. But if any other extended family wanted to send you money, the government straight up said, no, they don't need it, they're not deserving of it, as a way of compelling people to pursue marriage and pursue childbearing. Even in their system of employment in higher military positions, again, people who had children were treated as more favorable, treated as more deserving of certain jobs. And so we see this across societies, again, something that humans do to ensure enough babies are born. But as disciples, we don't need to be stuck with that view. Some people kind of take this a step further into the view that your lives haven't really begun until you're married, like you're in this weird limbo stage. But again, there's no aspects of discipleship that first require you to be married. But some people act like, I don't have to learn how to be responsible with my money because it's not like I have a spouse or kids to provide for. I don't have to learn how to be self-controlled or disciplined until there's somebody else telling me what to do. That doesn't work out. That said, we need to learn how to celebrate singleness instead of treating a person as though they're missing something till they're married. Which leads me into my second point. Whoever you are, I like you. So part 2, number 2, I need to find my other half. Or my other half is out there, and I need to find them. It's this concept that your soulmate is out there. It's this thought that, again, you need somebody to complete you. I saw a Pew survey from a couple of years ago that said that about 30% of Americans still believe there's only one true love for every person. I really hope you find them if you believe that. And this one actually goes back to ancient Greece. Plato wrote about it in the Symposium. This thought that humans had 4 arms and 4 legs and 2 faces, like 2 people smashed together into one. I really want 2 guys to get up here and demonstrate. Yeah, let's not. But humans were powerful. They had everything they needed. And the gods decided they were too powerful and just wanted to smash them all. And Zeus thought, I've got something even worse. I'm just going to cut them in half. Instead of destroy them all, I'm going to separate them from their other half. And so we've literally been split in half, and we're basically out there searching for our other part of our soul. And this thing still has power in our culture. There's these cheesy quotes circulating. You could just Google image search soulmate. Or you could look at the Facebook of those relatives that you never talk to. One of my favorites, then my soul saw you, and it kind of went, oh, there you are. I've been looking for you. Too bad I already married that one, I'm sorry. Throughout life, you will meet one person who is unlike any other. You could talk to this person for hours and never get bored. You could tell them things, and they won't judge you. This person is your soulmate. Don't ever let them go. I mean, I'm already judging myself just reading through these. I'm clearly lacking this one. And as Americans, we don't believe this original myth, do we? But we still live as if it's real. Because people, again, still love this concept of soulmate. And then it gets spiritualized when people start talking about how God made you 2 for each other and it was meant to be. And I mean, I think it's true. No, Justin's not even paying attention, whatever. He's testing. Yeah. So, do I believe that God is big enough to plan the perfect partnership? Absolutely. But how arrogant is it to think that we found it? I mean, again, he's texting over there. So, in our fallen worldviews, how do we trust ourselves to identify that we know exactly what is good? But this belief ultimately tries to avoid that we are choosing beings. We make decisions about who we spend time with. We are not thrown around by the winds of fate, who are also apparently Greek deities, and we are not fractured creatures looking for the other half of our souls. We've got choices. Number 3, marriage doesn't interest me, so I don't need to think about this. This one goes into the opposite ditch, and it comes from a few different places. The early church went through this time period that viewed anything to do with sex and more broadly the body as dirty and sinful rather than as part of God's creation. And over a millennium later, we still have strains of this one, as if it's more holy to avoid it altogether, which seems like an odd belief for a Christian to hold if you believe that God meant that it was good when he said his creation was good. Second, our generation, millennials, are overall losing trust in institutions as a broad category and losing trust in marriage specifically. One of the polls I was looking at found that only about 30% of millennials said that having a successful marriage is one of the most important things in their life. Now, about 70% did say they want to get married. So that shows that there's about 30% that just don't have marriage on their radar of something they want to do. And then that leaves that other 40% that wants to get married but apparently doesn't need it to be successful. Which shows some of this cultural fatalism and cynicism that we have about it. But we don't accidentally stumble into having a happy, successful marriage. And then another category of the people who argue that I'm not interested in marriage, I don't want to be part of it, there's the people that argue that marriage is just a piece of paper, that the legal aspects that are intertwined with the religious concept are just, it's too messy and it's been too corrupted by the world. And then there's my feminist sisters who are painfully aware of the issues with traditional marriage and view it as a sexist institution. Now, newsflash, sin is a sexist, racist, classist institution. We're not going to avoid that until we have completed God's work on this planet. And it's cool because we get to be those people. We get to be the people that fight against the way that the world is corrupting God's creation. So when God has made something to be good and made it to be a useful, constructive thing, who are we to say otherwise? So again, I want to repeat myself that God does call people to singleness. But that's something that needs to be made as a decision in community with discussions with other people, not based on your fear or cynicism. Then the next one, this one actually, I had two related concepts, which all got rolled into one on the note sheet, so I'm really excited about that one. So number 4, people grow apart over time. Some marriages just won't work out. This one, again, is a distinctly, profoundly non-Christian view of things, but it's something that our culture really has. Our culture has this fatalistic bent, this concession that people change over time and they just drift apart. It was weird a couple of years ago when I was scrolling through my Facebook and realized that people I had known in college had been married and been divorced by that point. And they just had this fatalism that they gave it a shot and it didn't work out. But as disciples, part of what we get to do through marriage is be image bearers of Christ and live out the way that our God makes promises and keeps them. We more appropriately think of marriage as a covenant, the lifelong pledge to love and serve somebody, regardless of how well they do the same. And again, we get to live out this aspect of who God made us to be through this relationship. But our culture still has this fatalistic thought that some things just won't work out. And then my last one is a bit longer, and I guess after that point we'll break for dinner. Number 5. When Cupid has struck you, it's meant to be. Oh, we love Cupid. He comes from Roman mythology. Eros is the Greek counterpart of him. And I was reading through some of the original myths about Cupid, and he was not nearly as cutesy as what shows up on Valentine's Day cards. I was a little disappointed by that one. And we don't literally think that there's this impish creature shooting us with arrows. But this notion of falling in love, more broadly, we still accept. Which itself is a little odd, because we've taken our lustful feelings, our emotions, and the whims of our heart and pretend as if it has deep meaning. So I will quote from C.S. Lewis, so that you can be mad at him, not me. Another notion we get from novels and plays is that falling in love is something quite irresistible, something that just happens to one, like measles. And because they believe this, some married people throw up the sponge and give in when they find themselves attracted by a new acquaintance. But I am inclined to think that these irresistible passions are much rarer in real life than in books, at any rate when one has grown up. When we meet someone beautiful and clever and sympathetic, of course we ought, in one sense, to admire and love these good qualities. But is it not very largely in our own choice whether this love shall or shall not turn into what we call being in love? No doubt, if our minds are full of novels and plays and sentimental songs, and our bodies full of alcohol, we shall turn any love we feel into that kind of love. Just as if you have a rut in your path, all the rainwater will run into that rut. and if you wear blue spectacles, everything you see will turn blue. But that will be our own fault. Again, this mythology of attraction and love distances ourselves from our choices. And this thought of being in love, it's only become accepted in Western culture in the past few hundred years. One of the things I was reading about was the narrative poem, The Tragical History of Romeo and Juliet, by Arthur Brooke. It was the source text that Shakespeare used. And before we get mad at Shakespeare for copying, it seems that Arthur Brooke had copied from an Italian poem of the similar name. So copyright law just wasn't what it was today. But Arthur Brooke's poem explicitly said a cautionary tale for young lovers, a warning against unhonest desire and neglecting the authority and advice of parents and friends. In either Brooks or Shakespeare's work is that tension between the state and the family and the church, and this thought that is love supposed to conquer it all? Quoting from the historian Stephanie Kuntz, one study found that before the 1760s, fewer than 10% of French couples seeking annulments argued that a marriage ought to be based on emotional attachment to be fully valid. By the 1770s, more than 40% thought so. So just in a decade, we had a pretty big change there. And this is related to what Sarah was talking about with the early days of the Industrial Revolution and the development of separate spheres. There was this seismic change in European culture. There was more wage labor. There was less of the inheritance-based agrarian household in which everybody participates, and more of the thought that man enters wage labor and takes care of the family. And so that developed that separate spheres. And Kuntz argues that this man going out to work, woman staying home, cult of domesticity kind of thing, created this emotional role, this thought that emotions were more valid. We also had the huge impact of the Enlightenment, the celebration of individualism and individual rights, which meant that family-arranged marriages would be on the way out and personal choice would be on the way in. And so that was one of these big historical changes that we saw that led to more acceptance of attraction as being the primary motor for a marriage. And so I hope I killed Cupid. I hope. Actually, he'll come back after dinner. I reference back to the attraction issues towards the end of this. And so I think that's a good place to stop and head off to dinner.
All right.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to go ahead and start us with a prayer. I'm going to pray. All right. Dear God, we just want to thank you so much for the chance to be here tonight, and I want to pray that we would continue to listen with open ears, and most importantly, that we would hear what your Spirit wants to say to us tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, if you need a packet, if yours is messed up or you didn't get one, please raise your hand, and they're going to pass them down. Okay, and then we really need to be quiet. The first thing we're going to start with... Hey, Sarah, we have one over here. The first thing we're going to start with is a couple of more testimonies. Again, a reminder, if you came in late, some students from our community have written testimonies anonymously, and other students are getting up to read those and share those so that we can hear real stories of people that are a part of our family here and hopefully understand more. So Victoria's going to come up first.
In 7th grade, I was trying to Google pictures of my favorite movie characters for my binder. A link to a site full of fan fiction was the first thing to pop up. I clicked it, curious, and at first it was okay. No different than reading a normal book that I loved. But then it was full of sex, and I closed it, shocked. Then throughout the day, I kept going back, kept reading more, kept digging myself into a bigger and bigger hole. I couldn't stop reading these stories all the way until my freshman year of college. The first time I can remember struggling with my sexuality was in 10th grade. I was addicted to reading pornographic material and took it to the next step by reading things with same-sex couples. After that, my thoughts went out of control. I would be fantasizing any second of any day. At first, it was just actresses from TV shows and movies and the fantasies. But then I started placing myself into the fantasies with the women. This is where I started to get confused. Was I actually attracted to these women? Was I simply objectifying them? Or was this just a side effect of the addictiveness of porn? The people in my fantasies were fictional characters or actresses, people who I had never met. But in college, something shifted. Suddenly, girls I had never talked to or had very little conversation with were the objects of my fantasies. There was a desire to get to know them, to go out of my way to talk to them, to flirt. I wanted to tell people, to get help. I didn't want to live in the dark. This was starting to consume my whole life, and I had no idea how to control it. It was a constant battle between wanting to continue fantasizing and being full of shame. I eventually confided in a mentor of mine, someone I knew really meant it when they said you could tell them anything. I danced around the topic so long, probably being vague and not giving many details, but they asked detailed questions and talked about it so openly that they made me uncomfortable, but I also felt so free. After that conversation, I was a little shocked that someone actually knew all of my junk and didn't think I was disgusting. I think that was a fear of mine for the longest time. This is when I sought out help and started to see a therapist. The first time I talked about any of this in depth. I realized my grip on wanting to keep fantasizing, to play around with this same-sex attraction in my head, was one of the biggest things keeping me from getting my relationship with God to the place I wanted it to be. In therapy, I learned not only how to most effectively stop the thoughts, but how to shift them to healthier things. But I had to be willing to put in the effort. And this is still a constant struggle I have. Over the course of therapy, I reached out and told some of my closest friends about my struggle. I've only had one friend turn away from me some after telling them. But the friends whose lives reflected Jesus accepted me and stressed that they loved me and offered to be my accountability. There are some weeks I don't want to put any effort into mental self-control. And then others, I have to stare at a spot on a wall to avoid looking at specific girls in my class. But these are the weeks I am reminded by prayer, scripture, and friends that Jesus is greater and worth being disciplined for. Jesus can break every chain.
Porn does not always remain porn. I was first introduced to pornography at the age of 14 through a friend of mine. Initially, I was simply curious and thought it was a one-time thing, but as time passed by, it became a serious addiction. Every time I experienced negative emotions like anger, frustration, loneliness, I would watch porn as I remembered the pleasure it gave me, and I started using it regularly as a medicine to cure those negative emotions. I grew up in church all my life and knew that watching porn was wrong. The thought of doing something wrong made me feel extremely guilty and got in the way of my relationship with God. My addiction with pornography didn't just stop with pornography. There finally came a time when I started acting on all those lustful feelings that were built up watching pornography. I got into something even more destructive and toxic. I started visiting prostitutes and paying for sex. The rush that I started getting from visiting prostitutes was intoxicating, since it was wrong, not only in the eyes of God, but it was also a crime you could get charged for. The thought of being in a risky situation, as well as putting in no efforts to be with a girl, got me excited, and I kept going back. I've also lived in fear of immediate physical consequences of various sexually transmitted diseases. After being addicted to paying for sex, watching porn did not make me feel guilty at all. I started seeing it as an extremely small sin compared to what I was addicted to. My actions started making me feel so guilty, and the shame that it brought me created a huge gap between me and my relationship with God and the community. I was naive to think that I could fix this problem all by myself. And at last I confessed about it to a close friend of mine from Focus. I also started getting help from other members of Focus, and this played a huge part in my life. I could not believe how non-judgmental and accepting the people of this community were. Coming out and confessing my problem has played a huge part in my battle against this toxic addiction. With their help, I was able to put a plan into action, and this has given me a lot of confidence in my struggle with this behavior. I still struggle daily with lustful thoughts and the temptation to pay for sex, but the main motive behind my message is to warn everybody that watching pornography does not just remain pornography in your life. There comes a time when you start acting on those feelings, and this separates you from God, community, and even yourself. This is something I would never wish upon for anyone. Sin is a way of taking you where you would never thought it would take you, and keeping you longer than you ever thought it would keep you. And I found this to be especially true with my sexual sin. My advice for everybody struggling with pornography or even lustful thoughts would be to confess and get help as soon as you can before this sin escalates even further in your life. Work to deeply understand God's grace, and do not isolate yourself from the community. We have a God who is there to accept us just as we are.
So in preparation for this, I had gone through and practiced my timing based on the predicted schedule we had, and I had the perfect place to break for dinner, and then we're off schedule. I'm shocked. And so let's pick up, where were we, number 6? Does that sound right? Okay, cool. So again, this is on the theme of the various cultural beliefs that we have about marriage. Some of them are mostly true, some of them not so much. And one thing I wanted to point out, during dinner, I got about half and half comments from people. Several people came up to me with legitimately good questions or personal stories, and about half of y'all said, "You're really funny. I hope you keep making jokes." Priorities, yeah. I guess I have to catch your attention somehow. Okay, number 6. Marriage is just between me and my spouse. This one is related back to the end of number 5, how I was talking about we had this big cultural shift where we had acknowledged that we should have a lot of attraction and this sentimental core that the wife was responsible for. And so we had this shift into marriage is not simply about you have a household together and you have all this shared labor, but our culture has shifted into a belief that marriage is like best friendship, where you have that romantic passion, you have shared interests, and it's more about just you and the spouse than any shared common goals. And so part of why a lot of us are disillusioned about marriage is because we expect it to be so much. For most of human history, people were fairly geographically stable. We'd be intertwined in kinship networks, intertwined with our families, and so our relational and emotional needs could be served by that. And a marriage wouldn't have to fulfill that. But our culture has shifted to being more mobile, in which the very structure of our careers often just drags us across the country. And so we keep putting all this pressure on marriage itself, saying that my spouse, my partner, needs to be all of this relational weight. So we put all of this expectation on a marriage, and all of this pressure that I don't think the institution of marriage is really designed to hold. Marriage won't fulfill all your relational needs. Primarily, as a Christ follower, the most important relationship is with our Creator, and if that's out of whack, the marriage will be out of whack. But beyond that, you need to have a context of healthy friendships. But so often we expect our spouse, our partner, our other half to fulfill all of that, instead of acknowledging that we need to have strong same-sex relationships. Similarly, just as a single person, there was no sin in my life that didn't ultimately impact my community. Anytime I was failing to be who God had made me to be, it had a negative impact on those around me, whether I was failing to call them out on their sins or just not being as awesome as I was supposed to be. And the same thing holds true with our marriages. But we keep rolling this into like the marital unit. It's like you're one couple now, you're one thing, and we kind of treat that in too much isolation now. Another one on that thought of it just being between the two. This one I think is pretty interesting. Again, this is still under number 6. For a lot of human history, we had more family connections, and we've shifted into this thought that the marital relationship needs to be economically self-sufficient, stable on its own, to where people take it as a point of pride to be financially independent, and where they feel like there's something shameful for having their extended family helping them out. And I think that was just interesting. It's not spiritual, it's just interesting to me. Number 7. Marriage is about... Oh, I don't know why you have a... Oh, I'll use the and. Okay. Marriage is about self-discovery and self-fulfillment. And marriage is about demonstrating the nature of an existing relationship between two people. So I know that's a big context, a big statement. And this one, I wanted to point out, I don't have a really good, concise way of saying it, but this is something that our culture is pushing towards. And being the nerd I am, I wanted to quote from a certain Supreme Court ruling that demonstrates the changing nature of marriage. I love this quote, and I hate it. No union is more profound than marriage, for it embodies the highest ideals of love, fidelity, devotion, sacrifice, and family. In forming a marital union, two people become something greater than they once were. And some of the petitioners in these cases, as they demonstrate, marriage embodies a love that may endure even past death. And so he goes on to talk about these cases and about how people are saying it's disrespecting marriage, but he says it's not. They respect marriage so deeply, they seek to find its fulfillment for themselves. Their hope is not to be condemned to live in loneliness, excluded from one of civilization's oldest institutions. So this concept, this kind of belief about marriage, it plays out in a couple of different ways. It's this thought that you have this intense relationship with a person. There's this thing that already exists. And you just want the society to acknowledge it. Like you're already in love. And that's kind of the snowball view of relationships that a lot of us have. This thought that, well, you talk and you think you're friendly and then you go on some dates or you just hang out, whatever that looks like. And eventually people move in together and after a few years they're finally like, okay, I guess we're married. And so finally they make it legal. And so it's again this thought that you're trying to learn more about yourself or be a better person or you already have this relationship. And again, this is one of these things that our culture says. The people that we encounter and talk to will have this view at times. And it's not really a Christian view. It's just something that we have to deal with with those around us. Something else about this view, especially the thought of you want to have your surviving spouse acknowledged on the death certificate kind of thing. It's kind of this thought that marriage is about essentially tattooing myself onto somebody else and saying that you're mine, that there's this piece of possessiveness going on. And this, again, cultural view that marriage is something that is about embodying a love that transcends life and death, which again is not an essentially Christian view, considering that Jesus said there'd be no marriage in heaven. And so if we think that marriage is so good and so great, you'd think it'd be part of eternity. But somehow God has better plans. And so there's this part of our population that treats marriage as this great, transcendently good thing, something that you really should aspire to. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, we've got the pieces of our culture that says, number 8, marriage is boring and dull. Tying the knot is the end of freedom. Which you've seen in the language like the old ball and chain. And even our traditions of bachelor and bachelorette parties with your strippers or whatever you want to do to demonstrate it's your last night of freedom. And becomes a running joke in our culture about being boring. Which again I find really interesting, especially this thought that marriage is the end of freedom. Because to some extent it's kind of true. One of the books that I quoted towards the end, or that's in the reference page, one of the books is pointing out that our culture does have this negative view of marriage. But when you survey people, 2/3 of marriages say that they are very happy. Married people consistently show higher levels of satisfaction with their lives than those who are single, divorced, or cohabitating. But for some reason, we hate this thought of losing freedom. American culture values independence so deeply that we just regard it as innately good without really asking questions about it. Specifically, what is it that I want the independence to do? So one of the things that comes up most that couples fight about, again, is how you spend your money. And this is one of the things that really highlights, again, we want that to be like a private part of our lives. And when you're finally sharing resources with somebody, people start to behave the way they should have been behaving all along, acknowledging that the resources they have are a gift from God. And so when we have this fear of end of freedom, again, it's more of this fear of doing what you should have been doing from the start. Oh, number 9. God made marriage so that I can feel loved. So we're drifting into the ones that I think we're getting closer and closer to more truth in them, but they get thrown out of perspective. And since we're running a little bit behind again, I'm sorry if I start rushing through things. Just yell at me if I don't make sense. Number 9, God made marriage so that I can feel loved. This one goes back to that first question. Does this view treat another person like an object? Or is it treating a person like a person? So if you've got this need in your life, if you're turning to marriage or if you're turning to another person to fulfill this need for love, you're going to be running into problems. Because if you're not content as a single person, marriage won't solve that. You'll just start sucking the life out of somebody. But part of the really cool thing about marriage is that I have this inescapable, constant reminder in my apartment that I've been created to do good works. And that I can show love to another person. I should point out that Justin is better at that than I am. But marriage is great because it forces me to show love. But if you go into it thinking, I'm doing this so that I can be loved, you've got your priorities flipped. Let's see. Number 10. This is a view that starts popping up in some of the Christian marriage books, and I really like it, and I also absolutely hate it, because it's quoting Scripture. It's not good for a man to be alone, so you should get married. And when I say it's not good for a man to be alone, I want to emphasize man. This one I have seen pop up in various opinion pieces in popular news sources. I see it pop up in Christian marriage books. And the book that this idea stemmed from is one of the favorite books of the leader of a particular organization that I don't want to say by name. Let's just say it's an organization that has a particular focus on the family. Yeah. And I don't want to say it by name because I'm going to kind of be mean here. But so there was this book that was written in the 70s and then republished in the 80s. The opening statement, the crucial process of civilization is the subordination of male sexual impulses and biology to the long-term horizons of female sexuality. So it's this basic thought. The guys are kind of uncivilized, brutish, whatever, and they're in perpetual adolescence and don't really grow up unless they get a woman's civilizing touch in their life. And again, I'm a little dismissive of this view, but it's something that has some power behind it. People really like believing it. It makes the guys feel good because you're not as responsible for being a loser. Makes the ladies feel great because we get to go in and just save somebody's life. And it's really difficult because it seems to me that men need to learn to walk uprightly with God regardless of whether or not there's a woman involved. Yeah. But what I like about the view is we all are called to point each other back to Christ. Like, we all have that responsibility to each other, and it's not good for us to be alone. But we need to be in community with each other. Again, this is part of this shift and trying to put all of this weight on marriage and saying, like, my partner, my spouse will do all of the perfecting of me instead of putting you inside a larger community. So related to that one, number 11, marriage is necessary for spiritual growth. So it's like a further spiritualized view of that one. One Christian book that I otherwise like has this quote, "Nothing can mature character like marriage." And the difficulty with that is this thought, you think if that's really true, it would pop up more in Scripture. And if that's really true, it's a wonder we ever had leading Christian thinkers in a monastic tradition of not getting married. But that said, marriage is an amazing tool for seeing our flaws. Then again, so many bad jokes there about my problems. So I'll go to the parenting because I'm not a parent, and so I can distance myself. But I hear stories from parents being absolutely humbled by their children's behavior when they realize the kids are only acting the way that the parents had modeled. And so parenting does great things, marriage does great things like that. But if you have this view that in order for me to grow spiritually, I'm going to get married, then you just be treating your potential spouse as a tool of spiritual growth and not a person. Another view on this one, again under number 11, some people really hyper-spiritualize this and focus on marriage as this essential part of of how we live out our relationship with Christ. And so there's these metaphors about how we are the bride of Christ. And so Christians are called to live out a marriage relationship where the husband represents Jesus and the wife represents the church. And it somewhat derives from Ephesians 5 and gets stretched to interesting places as it relates to decision-making and authority in a marriage. And the difficulty of stretching this too far is that we also have the metaphors like in Galatians 4 where we are adopted to sonship. So I don't think you can argue that the letter was written only to males, and I don't think you can argue that I have now transformed into a guy because of Galatians 4. So we need to be careful with our metaphors and which meanings we derive here. But again, you'll see that view, especially in some of the Christian marriage books, that elevate it to like this great transcendent spiritual state. Again, it's pretty great, but there's definitely some challenges with those views. Number 12, marriage is designed for human reproduction. This statement's hard because it, again, has a lot of truth in it, but it gets thrown out of perspective pretty easily. One of the articles that I read recently had a statement, part of the foundational Christian understanding of marriage is that it is open to life, open to children. Which, if you take that position that marriage exists so that babies can have a stable home, it's good for the babies, but then it excludes others from marriage. So those who can't have children or are beyond childbearing age wouldn't be suitable for marriage because marriage is about reproduction. So again, there's something that's true when it comes to where's the best place to have babies, but when it comes to why does marriage exist, what this does is just excludes people from a good thing because of other health issues. So something further that happens if you get too out of balance and put too much weight on childbearing, it turns the spouse into a breeder instead of a person. And people start idolizing having a child as if there's something spiritually deficient with them because their bodies aren't doing what they want. So, as with any life decision, these are conversations to be had in community. Don't just quote me somewhere on that one. Have conversations with your friends and mentors. You can't simply say, I don't want children without openness and humility. But the same is true of me saying, I want to have 20 children. Or I want to move to Hawaii, or I want to buy an old school bus and start a band with the family, or whatever it is. Yeah. Any of my Partridge Family fans in the house? Okay. Yeah. Number 13. Marriage and children are about ensuring security when I'm old. Again, this one has got a little bit of truth, because throughout human history, most societies are organized in such a way in which your blood family takes care of you when you're old. I should note that Stephanie Kuntz had gone through all of these different marital and semi-marital relationships in cultures all around the world. And she pointed out that some cultures have different ways of taking care of kids, and some cultures have different ways of making the kids themselves as opposed to who's raising them. But she said the one thing that marriage does that nothing else does is gives you in-laws. So I thought that was interesting. One of the kind of Christian books I read had a quote, "People don't marry for the right to have sex. They marry for love and the opportunity to build a life together with another human being. They marry because when everything goes wrong and life is at its most challenging, it's comforting to have a hand to hold. Because in the darkness of the night, a bed feels a lot less empty when you're not lying next to somebody who loves you." It's really sweet. Until he goes on to talk about that issue of, again, who's going to take care of me when I'm old? So are you treating your potential spouse as a person? Or is that avenue to financial and relational security? And so again, that's something that just fundamentally doesn't fit with the way that we're supposed to treat people. That said, again, the family seems to be one of the primary ways that God provides for us. But you can't get that out of balance and out of whack. Continuing with the ways that we use people. Number 14. I have sexual needs, and marriage is designed to fulfill them. Did I hear some disappointed sighs in here? I know, we want this to be true. This is like pure wishful thinking. I love it. Sex is described often as this animal instinct, but we're not animals, in spite of what Maroon 5 wants us to believe. It's also in blurred lines, by the way. And our culture sometimes obliquely references this under the category of just physical needs. But it's not really survival need like food and water is. And even if you thought it was, a need does not justify fulfilling it through illegitimate means. Now, I'm sure there's somebody out there thinking, but Paul said it's better to marry than to burn. And so there's somebody out there who, again, wants to feel entitled to sex at some point. I'm pretty sure that wasn't written as a piece in dating advice on who you marry or anything like that. Because the truth is, if you don't learn sexual self-control as a single person, getting married won't solve your problems. You'll just start to use the other person. And so we can't think of ourselves as having sexual needs. We are supposed to give sexual affection and love to each other as a gift, not as an obligation. So again, I want to highlight that again. We can't think of ourselves as people with sexual needs that are going to get fulfilled by a spouse. Which, little gendered note on this one, did you know that in about 30% of marriages, the wife reports more interest in sex than the husband does? That's my idea of a fun fact. And I bring this up... I know, Sarah's are so much more fun than mine are. I bring this up because, again, when I read some of the Christian books that are trying to talk about women and their sexuality, they kind of make this division that, like, men are more physically affectionate and women are more emotionally affectionate and whatever. You want to make these gendered assumptions. And again, the problem is that's not a perfect prediction, and we get into trouble when we start thinking that, well, because as a female I'm more sexually driven, whoever I marry, it'll just be perfect. And so any of those gendered assumptions we make, we have to be really careful with. Now, what's true here? God knew what he was doing when he created the sexual relationships, and he made a good thing. And it does good things in the right context. But our culture commodifies it, simultaneously elevating it to the most important thing in a relationship, while also debasing it into something that you can pay for and get whenever you want, instead of being received as a gift. And then my last one, and also my longest one, number 15. Marriage is built on and fueled by strong sexual and romantic attraction. And so I kind of touched on a little bit of this one earlier with the thought of just Cupid's arrows and whatever he does with that one. And it's something that's very strong and pervasive in our culture. But historically, not so much. Across the ancient world, even until quite recently, the majority of marriages involving at least the royalty and the nobility had far more to do with politics than with love. The common people who wouldn't be part of the political marriages still largely married based on parental guidance, making sure that land stayed in the right circles, and again, things that had a lot more to do with stability than love itself. But we've had this shift where we've elevated love. To our post-Enlightenment individualistic thought, this isn't good. And so at this point, I thought it'd be really interesting to try to find more studies about even cultures that still have arranged marriages today, even though this individualist thought is now experienced all across our planet. And I just can't find great cross-cultural studies on contentment in marriage, in part because anybody who's trying to do research on this has value judgments. And so I found like 2 articles that were worth reading, and they both basically said there's not much difference in how content and happy people are in marriages. Actually, last month I met somebody who was running for an elected office in the area and ended up talking to her about her life story. Her parents are both from India and had come to college here, met each other, and they thought, hey, this person's great. And so they decided to call their parents and ask if they could have a love marriage across the world from where their parents were. And so the parents said, yeah, sure. And so these 2 people from India got married in Tennessee. And then eventually they had some cute kids. One of them grew up and was very devout Hindu and tried dating American men, and she's like, I can't find somebody who respects my religion. And so she called up her extended family and said, can you arrange a marriage for me? And so she had this hybrid. She described it as a hybrid of a blind date and an arranged marriage. She met this guy. She's like, hey, he's cool. And so they got married. And she says it's wonderful. But it didn't start because of that strong attraction. It grew from there. Sarah had quoted some statements from, was it late 17th century, about where we used to think that women were the far more sexually ravenous beings. I had a quote on here, actually from 1857, so a century after what she was referencing. It became accepted wisdom in the 19th century that normal women lacked sexual drives. One influential British physician wrote in 1857 that the majority of women, happily for society, are not very much troubled with sexual feelings of any kind. Love of home, of children, and domestic duties are the only passions they feel. Now imagine that incredulity. How much do you think that is a ridiculous view? Look at our modern American viewpoint with that same laughter. Now, of course, women did have sexual drives. In the Victorian era, there were all kinds of interesting medicalized cures for hysteria. And again, that's an interesting part of the internet to end up on. I recommend you do it with your Corfa. But at least as far as women were concerned, it wasn't seen as a valid avenue for marriage. But now we glorify this attraction. And even the larger Christian community has largely accepted it. And so we use different language about it and don't treat it the same exact way that our larger culture phrases it, as if you should probably have sex with a person a few times before you know if you really like them. We don't phrase it like that, but we still have this drive for strong attraction, whatever that looks like. And I don't think we should be diving headfirst into agreeing with this. I probably should have asked before, can you get the genderbread guy back up? Whoever's running the slides. While we're getting that up, I do want to point out, you know those brains that we were looking at earlier and all laughing at? Justin and I were having fun because we realized I've got the remote control part of the brain, and he's got the chocolate part of the brain. So again, there's something interesting going on there with our gendered brains. So the genderbread guy, when he reappears, this is the front lines of where our culture is going. People are labeling themselves by these different terms. Things like, oh, that's the old guy. I was going to reference the old guy. Breathe. Well, actually, let's hold on to genderbread 1 for a minute. You see how it's just this binary, heterosexual to homosexual thing? So this one came out a few years ago. And we've since upgraded to the genderbread 3.3, if you can find that one. So many different versions, in part because we're just making these things up. This is the things that our culture is saying, this is important. And so now it's not like from heterosexual to homosexual. Now it's pointing out that people are sexually attracted as opposed to romantically attracted. And so we've taken that orientation thing and split it in half. And again, I think this is very useful because this is where our culture is going. This is what people talk about. This gives us really good language. But at the same time, we as Christians can't just grab this and take it as part of our identity. Because things like this, again, even in the past couple of years, they've added a new spectrum onto that and split the orientation in half. And so we could ask, what gets added next? I knew some people who were in a polyamorous relationship, and they certainly viewed that as part of their identity and part of their orientation. What? You just want to hear more about polyamory. Yeah. Polyamorous meaning it was 2 guys and 2 girls in a relationship together, and so they all seemed some kind of attracted to each other, except one of the girls really didn't like the other girl, and so it was a mess. And it's interesting to think about because, again, the person that I knew best really viewed that as part of who she was, viewed it as part of her identity. And yeah, it didn't work out with that particular group. And then in the end, one of the guys started having relations with other people besides the ones in the poly group. And so it starts asking the question, is that having an affair or is that living out your identity? Again, if we start using terms like this, we're going to be running into problems. Because in the end, what matters is our choice of who we spend our time with and who we have relationships with. When we treat attraction as being the starting point for a marriage, we run into a lot of problems when people find themselves attracted to another person. For whatever reason, it seems that heterosexual males are wired to notice just how attractive women in their mid-20s are. And that's something that, again, we see across our culture. We see that thing where an older man would leave his wife and kids to be with a younger, hotter woman. Is that following his heart? Yeah, well, part of our culture would say that, but Christian thinking strongly condemns this. And this is where our culture itself just gets into this weird place. Because part of us want to value that attraction, that follow your heart kind of thing, but then to some extent we say, no, that's not good. And again, if we put polyamory on there, we'd run into problems again, because most recent poll I saw showed that over 80% of Americans say that extramarital affairs are always wrong, which has actually increased about 12 percentage points since the early 70s. So we're getting more restrictive on this thought of extramarital affairs. But if you say it's part of your identity, and you fully subscribe to this, can you actually judge that or not? So what we've ended up with is this glorification of the initial attraction and infatuation, as if that's the gasoline on the fire that drives people together. But then you condemn the later attraction. And so we put this pressure on a relationship to maintain something that I don't think it fully is expected to do. So I think I don't have a brilliant conclusion to this one, other than to give a cue for Brad to show up at some point, and then whoever's speaking next for one of the stories from the community. But all I have for conclusion is just this statement that we don't have simple, easy answers on what marriage is supposed to be, because it seems to be a balance of a lot of these different things. And it seems to me that balance should be different for different people. And so for some people, that drive for family is pretty high, and for other people, that drive's not as important. But there's other relational things that they really want to be able to show love to a person in that committed relationship. And I don't think we should be excluding ourselves or others from something that God made to be good based on cultural assumptions and fears. We do ourselves and the people we are called to love a disservice when we're too narrow on these definitions. One of the things of the stories that have been read out so far, the one that Rhett had read out, and that girl that had said, why would I like someone I thought was gay? Again, when you're taking these things on, these concepts of attractions that we have and putting people into a box, I think it's doing a real disservice when people disqualify others from a relationship saying, I don't want to be in a relationship with somebody who is romantically attracted to the wrong person or has some attraction that's not essentially godly, especially when that person has made a commitment not to live out that attraction. So I'm sorry that I can't end on a brilliant joke, but Brad's going to come up next and talk more about the sexuality side of things. He's probably going to say how everything wrong on the genderbread person is and how we shouldn't even talk about it, so we'll see how that goes.
As a male, I struggle with same-sex attraction. As a child from the 3rd to 6th grade, I was called gay, gay-wad, fag, and faggot most every day. Grade school children really have an expansive vocabulary for classifying a boy who would rather draw his dream home than play soccer. Prior to those years, I loved going to school, and I was more talkative and engaging. They called me these names not because as an 8-year-old child, I was an advocate for gay rights or acting in a same-sex relationship. They called me these things because I didn't like sports, wrestling, and being loud. I demonstrated more feminine qualities. I was more emotional, and because of a bad choice of leather sandals that I wore one day in 3rd grade that apparently looked like girl sandals, it started it all. 9-year-olds have no idea what those words truly mean, and they certainly don't understand the hurt that they can cause. During those years, I didn't tell anyone about the consistent name-calling at school. Thankfully, I had a loving, godly family who taught me how to love Jesus. Although I never talked to my parents about it, I talked to Jesus about it a lot.
I remember the pressure to tell my parents, but I was too embarrassed and fearful of how they would respond. Why are they calling you that? Are you gay? They might say. Or the fear of them recommending me to see a counselor. I didn't consider myself to be gay and never wanted to be. I didn't even fully know what that word meant as a 9-year-old. I didn't want the name calling to be a big deal. I just wanted it to go away. My main motivation during those years in response to the name calling was to just treat people the way I would want to be treated. I hated how much I was treated that way and never wanted anyone else to be treated that way. So I always try to be nice and friendly to everyone, but who wants to be friends with the kid who's gay and gets made fun of? In the 6th grade, my best friend left a note in my locker and told me he didn't want to be my friend anymore because he thought I was gay. We weren't friends any longer, and after that, he took my other friend with him. After the 6th grade, things got a little better. It's amazing how much a new pair of Nike Shox and having your braces removed will do for your self-esteem. I worked to talk more to people and be more involved. When I hit puberty, I began to realize that I was mostly just attracted to other guys. I was also attracted to girls and liked girls, so at first I didn't think of it much. Those years are confusing in general, and I didn't understand what was happening with my body and emotions. Over the span of a couple years, I would overhear conversations guys would have about girls. Then I began to take notes of things like on TV and started realizing that most guys are attracted to only girls. It began to feel like something was wrong with me, since I wasn't only attracted to girls. I was very confused. Again, I didn't talk to anyone about this because I was too confused and embarrassed. I began to question if this meant, was I gay? I didn't want to be gay. I didn't choose that. I hated being called that in elementary school, and I did not want to be that. I wondered if this attraction would go away. Over those 2 years in middle school and moving into my freshman year of high school, these attractions didn't go away, and hormones only got stronger. It wasn't going away, and I was mostly attracted still to other guys. I was ashamed and confused. I knew as a freshman in high school what Christians thought about gays. I didn't feel comfortable talking to any other Christians about this. I had read what the Bible says about homosexual relationships. I began to think that I was going to hell because of this attraction. I had a hard time believing that was true, though, but I couldn't see any other way. I grew up in church and knew God was a loving God, but how could He let me have this? I began to pray often that God would take away the attraction. It didn't go away, but God did put 2 guys in my life who were a couple years older than me, who I began to be friends with at a new church. One weekend, those guys invited me to hang out with them. We started sharing deep and more personal things. A couple of them confessed that they're attracted to other guys too. I had never heard another Christian talk about this at that point. The way they worded it was freeing for me. They said they struggle with that attraction, but that didn't define who they are. I confessed my struggle, and they spoke the same thing over me. They told me that just because I'm attracted to men doesn't mean I'm gay or homosexual. That it's just a struggle, and we have to keep praying and giving it to God. They told me that everyone has struggles of all different kinds, and we all have to give them to God. I left that weekend feeling free, like chains had fallen off. So much clarity and relief was brought to my life. I knew I wasn't going to hell because of this struggle. That was a turning point for me and pushed me closer to God out of shame, confusion, and guilt. Continuing in high school, I developed a deeper relationship with God, and I was emotionally and mentally doing very well. I never acted on my attraction to men and developed a strong relationship with God during those years, was heavily involved in my church, and had a couple dating relationships with girls in high school. But as I went into college, I began to watch porn. This was a whole new thing for me. I hated it. I felt gross. I began to meet with a counselor to talk about it. At that point, my counselor and the 2 guys from high school had been the only people I had told about my attraction to men. Just confessing this all to my counselor was so tough for me. I think I feared I would receive that same name-calling and abandonment that I did in grade school. I told my counselor, who was also a Christian, and he was incredibly loving and helpful. I talked to him about my struggle and asked how to pursue dating someone of the opposite sex. So, over the years, as I've wanted to pursue dating girls and considering having a family of my own, I've actually found it very hard to not have more people know about this struggle in my life. At this point, I had been involved in Focus for a while, and I decided to share this struggle with one more person. So I chose a leader in our community, who then encouraged me to tell a few more of my close friends in our community. I didn't want to do this, and honestly, I was terrified. But all of them responded so well. And they are all still my friends and think highly of me. They didn't question my sexuality, call me gay, or leave me a note of abandonment in my locker. In telling more people, I also feared that the foundation I had built and worked so hard to create, that my identity is found in Christ and not in the struggle, would be shaken and tested. Everyone, even Christians, have such differing opinions on the topic of same-sex attraction, and I didn't want to open myself up to the possibility of my foundation being shaken. I knew that if I told someone I trusted, and they responded out of anger, fear, disgust, or even confusion, that could be very hard for me to face, and could possibly hurt me and the foundation that I had built. It had taken a lot of wrestling with God to build that foundation, and I did not want to lose it. To this day, this isn't an easy thing for me to share with people. Over the years, as I've told people, most have responded very well, and some are still my closest friends. At one point, I was in a dating relationship with a girl, and after a lot of advice, I knew it was time to share this struggle with her. I confessed what the struggle looks like for me and how I work to handle it. She was very confused. She reacted out of frustration and hurt. I thought, what have I done? What is wrong with me? My foundation was tested. Was I wrong to try and work at a dating relationship? I felt gross and embarrassed. It took me time to get back on my feet after that and not to buy into the lies that Satan wants me to believe about this struggle. If you struggle with the same-sex attraction, I encourage you to talk to a leader or mentor in this community who you trust, so that when this struggle gets tested or your foundation on what you believe about this topic is tried, you have other godly people to talk to. The truth is, nothing's wrong with me or anyone who struggles with same-sex attraction, and I am in no way defined by my struggles. I am, though, defined as a disciple, as a child of God, His creation, and in being made new in His Spirit. That is what we should build our foundation on and work to be. Yes, I fall short, but so do you. And God still loves us and calls us His children, His creation, His disciples. At this point, I know that this struggle may not completely go away, and I'm okay with that. It's about what I do with it. I believe that I'm created uniquely as a male by God and that He delights in who I am and has created me to be with a female. I'm open to having a wife and a family someday, but I understand the complications that this struggle could bring. I believe that this struggle looks different for each person, and we have to be very careful about making blanket statements on this issue. For myself, I believe sex is not the main reason for marriage. In my situation, I'm attracted to women, but mostly men. I don't see it being a problem sexually to marry a woman, but I have to find someone who can be okay with this being a struggle of mine. Again, though I don't think sex is the main reason or should be the main motivation to get married. Marriage is a partnership, a union, a joining of two people in the Spirit of God. I want a partner in crime, a companion, not a wild sexual mate. If a friend of yours confesses a struggle to you, don't be shocked or embarrassed for them. Ask questions. Try and understand. We all have our own crap to deal with. We all have things to work through. But praise God for His grace and renewing Spirit that through His rich love for us, He sees and understands our crap, and He will not leave us in it.
Alrighty, now that everyone's stolen all my time, let me get up here and talk for 15 minutes about sex. No, thankfully we're through all of the really boring stuff like gender and marriage. We can finally talk about sex. Yeah. So all you guys, who came tonight just for the sex part of this talk, I won't let you down. I don't know why they chose me to do this talk. Maybe because I'm a guy, I don't know. Maybe because I'm not on focus staff, so any crazy stuff I say, they can just say, that's Brad, the minister out there in Denton. Oh, man. Talk about issues. This is such a weird one, isn't it? I don't know where to put it. Oh, right here? My focus is elsewhere. What can I say? My name is Brad Davis. I'm one of the ministers at the Denton North Church. A couple people have given their introductions already. Melissa said she was here 10 years ago. I was here 15 years ago in this room. Government, day one I came, never came back again. And I still made a B, okay? right. I'm excited to be in here. Did I forget the comments? I don't know. I don't know if I did it wrong. Did I do it wrong? It's been a while, okay? Did I do the other thing that's really bad? I grew up in this ministry. It's an absolute treat to be here with you talking about such a thorny issue. And, I just ask that you have a lot of grace and mercy for me. I feel like if you grew up in a quasi-conservative background, you have to, share a story of how you were, mean to a person who struggles with same-sex attraction at some point. It's just a rite of passage. You just sort of have to do it. You read any book on this topic, that's the first thing they do. So here goes my story. When I first helped start the calling ministry, this was about 11 years ago. I went to Sikkim for the second time. I was a minister now, so I kind of knew what I was doing. I led the on-campus evangelism time because I knew evangelism, right? So I have 2 Western Washington students with me. We're talking, going around, talking to people. We talked to this guy, and at the end, we had a decent conversation. And I'm like, let's pray for him because he is probably gay. And 2 of the girls were just indignant with me. I mean, they were like, how do you know that? And I kind of started to think about it, and I thought, man, I totally just generalized this guy from a few little things that I saw. And I probably got a little defensive, I'm the smart one, but that just stuck out to me as a time in my life I was rebuked harshly by younger people. And it just sort of, to me, I'm a pretty decent thinker. I mean, I'm not I am kind of a mean person. But, I had no ill intent. I was trying to do what's best, and yet I did something incredibly harmful, made a generalization. Thankfully, not in front of him, but we all, some of us have those stories. So, why Christian sexual ethics? Let's see, a few months back now, Rick Watts said we don't need ethics anymore. We're not, in Greek society, and we can just get rid of those because we've got the gospel, and that's plenty. And I certainly agree with them. But in this day and age where sexuality and everything we're thinking about sexuality has been challenged, I think it is helpful for us to have just a few guidelines that are based in the gospel. And so what I want to present to you are what I think are just general guidelines, pretty broad. You can narrow them as you see fit and as your walk with God and your faith allows. But I just want to give you a few baseline ideas here, and then that's pretty much it. So you might not get just a ton of really concrete ideas from me, but hopefully you'll be challenged in your thinking to really think through this topic. I will tell you that I'm spending a lot of time, too, particularly on the issue of same-sex attraction, because to try to talk about this in every aspect of sexuality would be very difficult, and I think this is one of those issues we have a lot of questions about and don't understand completely. And so if it seems like at times I'm focusing a lot there, then you know that I am intentionally, okay? All right, I have a few quotes. I love quotes. Oh, my goodness. Richard Niebuhr, a guy that wrote an excellent book called Christ and Culture. Not because it's excellent, really, but because the last 20 pages are life-changing. Don't read the first 110. Just get a summary. He wrote that men were generally right in what they affirmed and wrong in what they denied. Right in what they affirmed and wrong in what they denied. I don't think that means that we need to affirm everything, but what he was saying was that these traditions have thought about certain aspects of the gospel or theology, and they've really gotten right what they've studied. But they've often denied those things that they've ignored. And I love that idea. Ronnie, for those of you who know, one of our ministers in Garland talks about, I learned the Holy Spirit from the Pentecostals, I learned faith from the Baptists, I learned discipleship and obedience from the Church of Christ, that kind of mentality. Many of us were raised with really great ideas on this topic. Those things that we affirm as true and affirm as important are really great and useful. We can build off of that. But so many of the things that we deny or don't understand, it just comes from our ignorance. And so we've got to tackle this topic with humility and an ability to really ask a lot of good questions and not just start with what we know and what makes sense to us. I'm just reiterating what Garrett's already said. Just want to remind you of it. The second one I love, which is similar, just says, it's from Oscar Wilde, the well-bred contradict other people, the wise contradict themselves. There's something in following Jesus that allows us to explore a lot of ideas and to approach God with a sense of trying to figure out who He is and what He's doing. And yet, one of the things that Jesus countered often is this natural spirit in religion where I feel like I've got to get all the answers right. It's that law mentality. And so I implore you to take what we talked about here tonight and what I talked about and just begin to think about it. Use it as fuel on the fire in your relationship with God. That is the one thing that holds many of us here in common, is that we really are pursuing Christ. And we're trying to do that. We're trying to figure this out along the way. And so hopefully you'll do that. Point number 1, we are more than our sexual attractions. More than our sexual attractions. I won't belabor this point as Melissa's already talked about it. I gave you the verse Matthew 5:27-30, which is a little bit of an odd verse. It's where Jesus says if eyes cause you to lust, just pluck them out. And we tend to think about that verse as being like, what's the point of that? Like, how is that useful or beneficial? I want to suggest to you, well, part of the reason what Jesus was talking about is that we aren't defined by our sin. That we can throw those aspects off and that doesn't have to infect the whole body. That we're not defined by one aspect of ourselves that doesn't seem to fit God's standard. And there's plenty of questions for what that even is, but I just want to throw that out there. We are more than our attractions. The second point there is sex is bigger and older than the West. One of the biggest issues we have with this topic is we are obsessed with Western thinking. We're power hungry, we're prideful, we're arrogant, we don't pay attention to what other cultures before us have believed and still currently believe. We're not taught it. There are so many weird and wild things that other cultures have believed and still believe about sex. And somehow we take a lot of what we learn and think it's just the only normal stuff. Oh, what we learned was just pretty normal, run of the mill. Compared to everyone else, they have all the weird ideas. So let me give you just a quick sampling of those odd ideas. But let me make a quick point first. Sex is a biological universal, meaning that everyone on the face of this planet does it. Well, doesn't have to, but can, right? It's biologically universal, comes from our biological being or biological nature. But sexuality is not. How we think about sexuality, how we define sexuality is almost entirely cultural. I know that you've got that point in your mind, but it's just important to remind you of that. And as such, we pull a lot from our culture. All right, so the Bee Gees people, I don't know how to say their name. I'm just sounding them like the Bee Gees. Yeah. I'm going to call them Bee Gees because it sounds a lot like Bee Gees and it's memorable. So I will not honor them by calling their name correctly. Whatever you said their name is, go for it, okay? They have sort of like 5 different ways of thinking about people, right? They've got masculine men, they've got feminine men, they've got feminine women, masculine women, and then people who are sort of in the middle, who carry this very spiritual ability. People who are either born intersex or maybe became that way, whatever. They have some real different views on the world. But they don't technically think about things as homosexuality. So if you're a feminine woman and you want to date, if you're a masculine woman and you want to date another woman, that's just simply normal. That's not homosexuality. Okay? A lot of the cultures that we study outside of the West don't have a notion of homosexuality or same-sex attraction even. One of my favorites is the Aka and Agandu people. Again, I have no idea if I'm saying that right, so let's just pretend like I am. In Central Africa, who have sex 3 to 4 times a night. All right? And the point of sex for them is finding a child in the night. Okay? This is how they phrase sexuality. I'm searching for a child at night. All right? And one of my favorite things is one of these rituals that they do. And I tried to do a call and response with you, but Grant Trotter told me it wasn't appropriate. And so if he's saying it's not appropriate, it's definitely not appropriate. So these guys do a dance, and they're just doing some cool stuff. I can't imagine how cool this dance is. And this is literally what it's translated into English. How do you want it? Oh, it's about to get way worse, guys. The ladies call it, oh, I want it big. Men, how do you want it? Yeah. Oh, I want it long. Now, I'm not going to finish the rest because, believe it or not, it gets a lot dirtier from there. But if you're interested, read the article on the Aka and the Gandu people in the Atlantic. It's a very interesting article. No concept of masturbation doesn't exist. No concept of same-sex attraction. You try to talk to them about it, it's just like, what? Doesn't exist. How does it not exist? That seems weird, right? Okay, I'm going to go a slightly darker note here. The Greeks, right? We have this common practice that we know of that the Greeks, particularly older men, would have sex with boys, not as a perversion, guys, but as a way to masculinize them. It was thought that man-on-man sex in this case was a way to empower a young man in being raised up as a strong man. Because, sex with women, women are weak and they're not that smart, and so you got to have sex between guys. It just makes sense to the Greeks. I could go on and on and on. Lots of societies thinking about these things very, very differently than us. So who's right? I don't know. Scott Peck had some crazy ideas about sexuality. Just talked to Matt Clark about it. He's in love with that guy. He believed that that attraction is so strong when you're young, and infatuation too, as a way to trick you into marriage. That if you weren't attracted when you were young, you would never marry anyone. You'd be afraid to, So we have all these ideas wrapped up in what's true, what's not, who knows, We're just going to kind of dive right into this stuff. Where did the modern idea of orientation come from is point A. Well, we certainly don't have time to talk about the history, and like history of anything, it's complicated. But what we do know is that America, in the beginning of recorded history in terms of these issues, mostly they saw same-sex behavior as pretty normal adolescent experimentation. Just normal stuff. You just sort of grew out of it, right? And then at some point we decided to kind of call this behavior really deviant behavior. Sodomites and folks like that. We began to just sort of take a turn towards really not liking this behavior. And it's arguable as when that came in as a result of the Industrial Revolution or other things or whatever, but at some point it became deviant. Now, then we got really serious about it 100 years ago and began to make it a medical issue. We have a tendency in our society to medicalize deviance. But this one in particular has same-sex attraction, a really rough history. And it was only within the last 30 years that we really tried to kind of pull that away from being a medical problem. And it's interesting that we didn't treat adultery like that, or premarital sex like that, or even polygamy like that. But we did for same-sex attraction. So it has a really specific history. And of course, today we've more or less accepted it as a result of self-expression, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So where did the modern idea of orientation come from? Well, certainly nature and nurture. This debate has been raging for a long time, and I don't like to say nature versus nature. It's nature and nurture. They're both, right? And one of my biggest problems with trying to talk about the difference between a male and female brain isn't that we don't know a lot about brain differences, because we do, and there's a lot of good evidence that shows that people with strong same-sex attraction have similar brains to the opposite sex. Good information there. Good, strong evidence. The problem I have is that we can't leap from brain differences to behavioral differences. That's a big leap. To say that women are better multitaskers because they have more neural connections between their left and right hemisphere? What? You don't just believe that like, oh, duh. I don't think so. We know a lot about brain differences. Behavioral differences, though, that's a pretty big jump and a pretty big leap. Of course we are who we are because of our nature and our nurture. I often talk to heterosexual people in my class who say, well, but isn't the, person who has same-sex attraction, didn't they have like an absent father or, a gay brother or... Guys, for all the evidence that shows that there are these strong predictors of same-sex attraction, there are just as many predictors that you'll say that this person should have and they didn't, or say that other people should have had same-sex attraction and didn't. This idea that fundamentally same-sex attracted people grew up in a terrible household or grew up in this environment or that environment, I'm not so sure is really solid ground. And I think we have to be really careful about that. Because then what do people do who had a really great upbringing and had no problem say about their same-sex attraction? Do we try to convince them that, hey, somewhere along the lines you had something bad happen to you? Let's dig that out. I think we've got a problem there when we're trying to do that. I tell heterosexual people, well, can you imagine liking the opposite sex? Well, so where did that come from? Your nature or your nurture? I don't know. Well, that's what a same-sex attracted person feels like. They're attracted to the same sex. It's not a lie. Okay? They're not making up things. This is really important for us to understand this, because it's important to recognize that these things are very much hardwired into who we are. And we're not just going to fix them overnight, if that is even our goal of trying to fix them. So these folks, Melissa and Sarah, talked a little bit about scales for sexual orientation. And oh my gosh, this has become so complicated. We've got like 6 different scales just in the last 30 years. First was the Kinsey scale, which no one liked. Kinsey was a total freak when it came to sex. Did all kinds of weird research that people are still quoting today. And it's like he was kind of a madman. But whatever. So he, popularized the idea of sexual orientation on one spectrum, right? You like guys or you like girls. And then bisexual people are like, what are we, like, not humans? You like trade off a little bit of like for guys for a little bit of like for girls? That doesn't even make sense. So people are now using really 4 scales, but 2 more or less to try to describe this. How much do you like men and how much do you like women? So that a bisexual person likes women a lot and men a lot, generally. And an asexual person likes neither really that much. All right? So these scales, are they helpful? Well, I mean, to some degree, maybe, insofar as allowing us to recognize that people have a lot of different experiences and a lot of different places on these ways to map and categorize them. And there are certainly differences between men and women. As I think Melissa alluded to, but maybe not, men tend to be more on the poles when it comes to sexual orientation, either gay or straight. And I'm using a lot of really loose vocabulary here, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Whereas women tend to fluctuate a little bit more and tend to be a little bit more in the middle. Where does that come from? Shoot, we can even break down sexual orientation by race and ethnicity. That's interesting. I'm not going to, because that's a whole other conversation, but there's a lot there that we don't have time to go into. So, I say all that to say, point B here, that there are a variety of views on what even constitutes sexuality. No one, guys, is agreed on this topic. There's no book. Most of the research that's come out even in the last 10 or 15 years isn't all that helpful because it's so highly politicized. You say the wrong thing, you lose a career. We saw that with the professor down at UT Austin 5 years ago. So it's just hard for us to figure this out. And the liberal, kind of modernist view that, well, science will tell us everything we need to know has largely fallen on its face. Been overcome by the postmodern view. Yes, sir? Which part? Oh, my blanky views? Okay. Variety of views on what constitutes sexuality. All of you conscientious people, right? Gotta leave you with all the blanks filled out. How many of you try to predict? That's me. I'm the predictor, right? I'm like, what could this be? And you know what? How much pride I have? Sometimes when I use a better word than the presenter used, I just keep it. You guys know, right? Thinking, well, I think an array of views would be better here. So, there's like so many terms. It's like really kind of funny and a little bit comical if you look at the LGBT website and all the terms. I know what they're doing. They're trying to make sure that people have a voice and their experience is represented, and I think that's incredibly important. But for some of us looking on, it's like, whoa, that's like I gotta have like a score or memory card just to keep track of like asexual, no one, pansexual, I'm gender blind, so I don't really care that much, demisexual, sectional. Sounds like a couch. It's not a couch. Demisexual is like, I'm not like primarily attracted to people. It's like secondarily, like I kind of grow attracted to some people. Like what's next? Like tertiary attraction? Like, well, I woke up next to someone, I'm like, all right. It's like the third type. It's just the list goes on and on. It's tough. Sexual fluidity. Oh my goodness. Sexual fluidity sometimes is not even really nature-based, right? For those of you who've taken depression medication, some of you, your like sex drive goes somewhere away from you. It's like, oh, I remember how that was, and bye-bye. Sometimes helpful for some of you to bring you down, like 5 notches. But there is fluidity within all that. Obviously, as time goes on, we change. There's so many things. Guys, there's so many things within that's fluid. So language is important. Joe Susaida is not here today. I love using this quote. It's stuck in my head for years now. He always would say, incorrectly, that you got to read between the words. All right? And I love that. You do. You have to read. It's not enough to just read between the lines. You got to read between the words with this stuff. Figure out what people are saying and, what they're actually saying. I was hanging out with Trent earlier today, and he kept telling me he was from OKC. OKC. And I'm like, oh, OKC, yeah. And thankfully I didn't do that whole thing like, oh, yeah, I know where that is. And they, test me, and he's like, yeah, it's the capital. I'm like, OKC is the capital of Oklahoma? I've never even heard of this place. I think Oklahoma City was the capital. He's like, oh yeah, OKC. OKC. And I'm like, oh, we're talking about the same thing. Okay. So many times when we're talking with people about this issue in particular, we're talking about the same thing. We find out we're having an argument over literally the same point that we agree with each other on, right? We know that we're in trouble, and we're really loving to argue when that's, something that we find. OKC. Trent, come on, that is not cool. That's not cool. OKC. Point C. Any attempt to narrow or broaden... I don't know if I can say this word, but kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? Any attempt to narrow or broaden our opinions, specifically on same-sex attraction, will have consequences. And will probably make us quite a few enemies. This is one of those issues that, I understand Christians who don't speak out of fear or rejection because it's hard sometimes to know what to even say. What am I going to do when I put my foot in my mouth? Now, my example of assuming is obviously wrong. But this is one of those really challenging ones. When we narrow or broaden our opinions on this, it's going to have consequences. So the whole issue is rather complicated. Surprise! It's complicated. It's just complicated. I go back and forth between trying to compare this to heterosexual issues, which again, we'll talk about this language in a moment, as being similar, but then at the same time thinking, wait a minute, this is kind of a different issue. This is harder in a lot of ways. So sometimes I'm thinking, yes, similar, and sometimes I'm thinking, no, more difficult. So let me give you a couple examples of this using some of the major arguments that are happening right now about same-sex marriage. So you've got the celibate gay Christian, right? The one who's decided that the only appropriate path for me as a gay Christian is to remain a celibate person. Okay? That sounds really tough. It sounds spiritually high in terms of calling. The question, of course, is why? And a lot of people, and I don't want to generalize too much, but I find a lot of people who fit into this camp still think about their orientation as flowing out of their sexual attraction. And therefore, they see marrying the opposite sex as fundamentally opposed to who they are. All right. Well, when you narrow it like that, some would argue you're really limiting your definition of, who you can marry, because you're not incredibly attracted to this person. And this idea that we need to be attracted to everyone in the opposite sex or everyone in the same sex actually isn't a very useful idea, right? Because believe it or not, you really only need to be attracted. It's really great if you can just be attracted to one person. When you get married, it's really great. Just the one. So, celibate gay Christians, and again, these folks, talk a lot about marriage, and man, I feel bad for them a lot in a society that doesn't honor celibacy. Talks about them like that weird uncle that will come and babysit your kids because they have all this time on their hands. We don't have much of a language for this, unfortunately. And so when we narrow that way of thinking about this issue, it becomes pretty challenging and problematic. Same-sex marriage. Oh my goodness, I would venture a guess is that most of you probably, if you grew up in a conservative Christian background, don't approve of same-sex marriage. Well, I'm going to be honest, a lot of folks who have same-sex attraction, when they feel as rejected as they do by the church, and, by society, it's not that surprising that they're falling away from churches that don't agree with same-sex attraction and going and getting married, particularly in a friendless society like ours. And again, we can argue with these ideas of same-sex, relationship and whether that's not a good idea. But when we narrow our view to just that, then we ultimately tell gay people you're only really doing what you should be doing when you get married to the same sex. And so where do people who really feel convicted that same-sex marriage is not an option for them fit in? What, are they not really gay? Now the gay community themselves is going, and community I use very loosely, reject them for not following along with that? It's tricky. It's tricky. Opposite sex marriage for people who have same-sex attraction. Now, ironically, this has probably been the path that most people have taken historically. Now, those who are for same-sex marriage might argue, well, that's because they've been forced into that path. Those who are celibate may argue, well, that's not really an option because that goes against their desire. But honestly speaking, the vast majority of folks I know who are married and struggle with same-sex attraction are married to someone of the opposite sex. Now, that might say something more about me than it does anything. But that's probably been the option most people have chosen in the past. Does that make it automatically right or good? No. But we listen to Christians who very much feel that same-sex attraction is not something in and of itself they can act on, and that don't choose, like the testimony you heard, to make attraction and desire the fundamental thing about their sexuality. Well, I'd say, yeah, we got to listen to them. But certainly there are problems with it. Healing sexual attraction. That seems to kind of gone out. The whole Pray the Gay Away movement, which seemed like very reactive, did a lot of harm. In their defense, I think some people were really well-meaning, but it became almost like a business where people were trying to sell, the idea that you could be straight with a few easy steps. Well, is it possible for people to be healed from their same-sex attraction? Well, it kind of depends on what you mean by that. Does that mean acting out on those behaviors if that's how you define what's sinful about same-sex attraction? Does that mean that they still struggle with it but have chosen to live a lifestyle that's, marrying of the opposite sex? Oh, my goodness, I could go on with this. Some people do away with all the terms. They say we shouldn't be calling ourselves gay, we shouldn't be doing any of this stuff. Our focus on all these terms is just wrong. We just need to be obedient to God and, do what we need to do from there. Guys, there are a lot of positions on this. Everybody has laid claim to the right position and put a stake down. And you're going to come across a full variety of people who believe all kinds of different things about this. Folks who are still struggling with this and trying to figure out, where do I fit in? What should I do? What is God's purpose for me in all of this? And it's those kinds of stories I think we need to really embrace. So which approach should we go with? Well, I don't think I can really tell you. I liked Melissa's cop-out answer earlier of the integrated approach. Oh, that was Sarah's. I like that one. That was a good one. I like the integrated approach. Just take things you like from all of them and put them together, I'm just messing with you. I'm just messing with you. Part of the problem we have, guys, is in academia, we love to find grand theories that explain everything. Well, with this issue, Christians have largely wanted a grand theory on it. They want some easy thing that's just like, all right, here, I'm going to write this on like a fortune cookie and give it to you and everything will be figured out. Doesn't work like that. Complexity often brings us to faith in God. Okay, in sexuality, like in any other aspect of our lives, we have chosen to see and serve fellow humans as image bearers. We have chosen to do this, see and serve them as image bearers, rather than use people as mirror images. This is something that I just felt like God kind of laid on my heart in the Song of Solomon series that we did the last 6 weeks at Denton North Church. And so, sexuality, like any other aspect of our lives, we've chosen to see and serve fellow humans as image bearers, rather than use people as mirror images. What I mean by this, my wife, Chelsea, beautiful, lovely Chelsea. Hi, Chelsea, are you already asleep? Okay, good. Said that she had no idea what this meant when I said it, so let me try to explain it a little bit better. Sorry, that did make you look bad. I'm sorry. She's normally pretty smart, but, In my mind, what I was thinking about this, well, first of all, it comes from a TV show that I love called The Wire. The quintessential white person that's always really kind of been interested in urban things loves The Wire. So that's just who we are as a group. Yeah, right. I do always talk about it. I'm sorry. Okay? I gave it in my promo, but I want to say it again because it was such a jarring image to me. It's of this politician. He's at a fundraiser. He dismisses his wife and kids to go home. And you kind of see him making eyes with an escort during the fundraiser. And then the scene immediately goes to him having sex with this girl in a bathroom. Gosh, she's beautiful. And, you know, he's not even looking at her. She's got her back to the mirror, and he's literally having sex with her while looking at himself in the mirror. And it's like one of those scenes you're just like, oh, man, that's so sick. But it says something so true about who we are. And it's intentionally saying that we often use sex as nothing more than a way to use other people for our own personal fulfillment. And even our sexuality, as Melissa, I think, so adeptly pointed out already. But we see and serve fellow humans as image bearers. If Jesus had the ability to do that when He really knows who we are, then you better believe we have that same responsibility with people. I put a passage there for you. I think it's one that you'll remember. So, many of us, I think, are attending the wrong debate and asking the wrong questions. Luke 18, 9 through 14. The folks that come to the temple and are so disgusted and glad that they're not the sinner. I think a lot of us, when we hear about people struggling with same-sex attraction, sinfully, one of the first things that comes to our mind is, I'm glad that's not me. Whether we're willing to admit it or not, I'm glad that's not me. Luke 18. Oh, I didn't include that one? Oh, sorry. Luke 18, 9 through 14. Attending the wrong debate, asking the wrong questions. I think some of us, our views could sort of be... I want to go through this really quickly because this is kind of confusing, but... that's what's so hard about this topic, right? You've got philosophy, and you've got theology, and you've got sociology, and so many things coming together at once that it feels incredibly overwhelming, I think, to talk about and to try to make sense of. Okay, so a lot of our opinions, so attending the wrong debate, asking the wrong questions, come from one of these sort of three general perspectives. We either come from a very conservative background where tradition is sort of the way we think about it, and tradition often means how societies used to do it. And so we talk a lot about sex as being about procreation and some of these other ideas. Certainly that would fall along the lines of a lot of what other cultures believe today. We think that in some way, in looking at the natural way of things, we're right. Guys, the natural way of things leads to genital mutilation in Africa. Because people say, well, if sex is really about procreation, they probably shouldn't have any pleasure. We should really honor women by clipping their clitoris off. I don't know if you want to really fit yourself into that general category or not, but there's nothing holy in looking back to tradition and thinking, well, somehow that's really what sexuality is about. It's a conservative viewpoint. And therefore, same-sex attracted folks, well, if they don't change their desire, fundamentally, the desire itself is sinful, and therefore we've got to fix them before they're going to be married. Not so sure that's a really helpful idea. Nor does it have much biblical justification in my mind. Liberal folks believe that more or less science has proven that these things are natural, and therefore, we have no shame in experiencing them, and therefore, we should just embrace them. Postmodern mindset is like, who cares about what everyone else is thinking? Just do what you want to do. Well, none of these viewpoints, regardless of which one you came from, I think, does a very good job of explaining some of these issues of sexuality. Call me crazy, but I think the gospel does a much better job. The gospel's way of presenting our sexuality as both something that's pleasurable and intentionally pleasurable from God, and something that really is a deep form of communication, not some better communication than other things God gave us, like conversation. The word Paul uses in 1 Corinthians 6:9 is soma, which literally means bodily communication when he talks about sexuality. What that means, I don't know. Bodily communication? I don't know what that means, but it's a mystery. Sounds important. So we're attending the wrong debate often. A lot of our ideas have been framed in one of these ways. And often the irony about liberal ways of thinking about this and postmodern ways is they're kind of like, hitting against each other. They're not even making sense of this. So sometimes as a conservative, it even feels hard to what are we debating against? What are we fighting, But I don't want to talk too much into that. If you're interested in philosophy, you certainly can look through that. So here's a bad question. Can gay people be fixed? I have a good question for you in return. I don't know. Can you? What does that mean? Can they be fixed? Are we saying that there's something fundamentally wrong with same-sex attraction? And where do you get that idea? I mean, there's a lot of different ideas on this topic that can really make us kind of stop and think, hey, I just skipped an entire section, I realized. Mid-thought. I'm like, I should have already talked about this, but I didn't. Oh, man. Thankfully, I'm doing really good on time. Okay. All right. Let me back up a little bit, okay? That would have been really helpful to keep that in. Wow, that's so funny. What happened was I moved something from the bottom to the top and then did it, but then just skipped everything below it. So, actually, this fits in pretty well. Okay, so we've got this idea of sexuality, this very conservative idea that sexuality is nothing more than a natural and procreative thing, right? It's gender-based. I'm a guy, I'm going to be attracted to girls. I'm a girl, I'm going to be attracted to guys, and anything other than that is just sort of by nature wrong, unnatural, doesn't work, not okay. It's kind of the conservative view often on sexuality. And then you've got people who, I don't know where they fit, but talk about homosexuality and heterosexuality are no different. We're all just human. This idea of breaking people up into a subspecies, it actually doesn't even make sense. Because just like heterosexual experience is varied, homosexual experience is very varied too. We'll talk about that in just a moment, I think, Yeah, we will. Good. So, even just this sort of separation and categorization of these two things that we think are kind of hardwired isn't a very good way of separating people. There are a number of other ways we could separate people that would be just as effective, which is to say it's ineffective. Okay, another interesting issue is, do we equate sexuality simply with desire? A lot of the way people in our society talk about sexuality is it's just simply your desire. Desire equals orientation. Where did that idea come from? It wasn't always like that. That's not immediately how we thought about orientation. So why is it that has to happen? It's such an interesting idea then, because if sexual desire is simply, I desire to have sex with someone. Guys, the average married couple has sex one time a week now. They're not even, some of you are thinking 2 times, maybe 10, 20 years ago when we had time for that. And now we only got time for 1 sex a week, all right? And that 1 sex lasts on average between 15 and 20 minutes. I mean, really? That, orientation is based on my sexual desire for this other person that it has its heyday for 1 time a week for 15 minutes? Well, then people start talking about sexuality as, well, it's just beyond desire. There's all this romantic stuff that happens in addition to just being, desiring someone's body. And that's when things get really loosey-goosey, okay? And by the way, having sex twice a week versus 1 time a week does not show that you're happier. Happy people, 1 time a week, pretty good for them. Even once a month is pretty good for a lot of married couples in terms of happiness. I know some of you, when you're young, you're thinking, oh, I'm going to have sex every day. And then you get married and you're like, oh, man, never mind, I'm not going to talk about that. I just want to mess with her, Okay. All right. So, desire, attraction is sort of this one dimension of this. Now, in our thinking, behavior is another dimension of this. And orientation, identity. So this is our way of breaking this stuff up into stuff that absolutely makes sense. I have a little diagram here for you from one of the largest studies that ever took place. I don't know, I'm losing my ability to talk. So this is 1992, so it's way old, 24 years old. Okay, just to let you know that right now. But it's still one of the studies that's cited. So there were thousands of people in this study. And 8.6% of women said that they had some type of adult same-sex sexuality. Could be an experience, could be a desire, all kinds of interesting stuff, okay? 60% said that they had an actual desire, yeah? A same-sex desire. This is 60% of the 8.6%, yeah? Tracking with me? Okay? 13% said they had actually had some sort of same-sex behavior of that 8.6%. And no one in women actually said that they had a pure identity only, by the way, sorry. And then of all three that said they had a desire, an identity, and behavior, only 15% of that 8.6% sample, which is where we get about 2% of our population back in the 1992s. This is increased by about 2 percentage points, would say all three of these are true for me. I have a desire, I have an orientation, and my behavior lines up with that. So which one of these people is technically homosexual? If you have a desire, are you? If you just had some behavior? Notice on this list there are plenty of people who have either been molested or abused or had some unwanted or maybe experimental type same-sex sexuality. Guys, we go down to the same list and it's, roughly the same, a little bit higher for behavior, which makes sense for guys, and desire a little bit lower, which is where we get our results of one. This can probably be kind of confusing to you. The point simply is that when we talk about same-sex attraction, we often aren't even talking just about people who are strongly attracted, or people who strongly identify with that, or people who've just had behavior in those areas. That this is pretty separated and kind of confusing. Also, I would ask you, because this is one of those statements I think is talked about a lot with this issue, love the sinner, hate the sin. I'm not for sure I like that very much. Partially because what's sin? Have we decided that the desire itself is a sinful attitude and sinful behavior? Do we say that same thing about heterosexual desire? Some would argue that heterosexual desire is itself a sinful thing, the way that our world treats it. That we somehow approve of premarital sex and adultery and somehow take all guns out on homosexuality or same-sex attraction? Where did that come from? That sounds like a power struggle to me about privileged people doing what privileged people can do. So where does this come into play? James 1:13 through 15 says that sin is birthed when our evil desires are dragged away and enticed. So at what point does something become sin? Is it behavior and behavior only? And is that behavior, that same-sex attracted behavior, again, something that deserves our ire, our vigilance more than premarital sex and adultery? Because often those sins have largely been overlooked by most Christians, as if they're just a part of heterosexuality. No one has had to come out about having premarital sex, and people are like, oh my God, I just can't believe it. Well, are they the same? Are they different? We have a lot of questions, I think, about this issue in particular. Psalm 37:4 says that God's going to give us the desires of our heart. Oh, man. That's another tricky one when it comes to using this word desire. Okay, so back to 2A. I'm so sorry I got us out of alignment there. So many of us are attending the wrong debate, asking the wrong questions. We're coming up with questions that were largely handed to us by people who passed down this knowledge from us. So what do we do about that? I told you, I gave you at least one question that I think is not such a great one. Can gay people be fixed? A lot of heterosexual people love the idea of same-sex attracted people being healed. But why do they love that idea? Because it makes them more comfortable? Because they don't respond in such... Why do they love that idea? And who do you think loves that idea better? Someone who actually is same-sex attracted as a Christian struggling with this? And we've got to be really careful because you know what, guys? Most experience and a lot of data shows us that this is not something that just goes away. It can lessen over time like any sexual attraction does, but most likely this is going to be here. And something short of absolutely God taking it away, which there are some stories, but the vast majority of them are fake. And we saw that a lot in that ex-gay movement that came out and talked about that. Now, there are plenty of ministries now that are helping people think about their sexuality and rethinking their sexuality, and they're great ministries. People in our ministry are a part of them, and I've seen the fruit that's come out of that. But one of the things that those ministries always do, and I think rightly so, is tell people there is no guarantee to this. The whole goal is not to change your sexual orientation or even desire, but it's to change your way of approaching God and thinking about this issue from a spiritual perspective. And that's really what the important thing is in the first place. There's this scene in Song of Solomon. It's such a crazy scene that makes no sense, but Solomon's throne horse cart thing is coming up out of the smoke. And as it turns out, it's actually it sounds like it's his cart, but it's actually his bedroom. And these women are being brought into his bedroom, and the guards are guarding the bedroom for the terrors of the night, which is basically just meaning Solomon is getting what Solomon wants. And Song of Solomon is really a wonderful book, and it contrasts this idea of people using other people for their sexual gratification and people really truly loving each other by choice. And I think this scene is amazing, the way that it's presented and the way that it's thought about. But one of the really wonderful things about Song of Solomon that a lot of people miss, because they read it and they think it's like a love story that's infatuation-based, is these two lovers really, really love the personhood and the image of the other person. As Solomon describes these women, it's all about their sexual beauty. It's all about the desires that he has in his heart to be in a sexual relationship with them. And he's got a lot of options there. But when the lover of the woman in Song of Solomon describes her, he starts with her eyes. And he moves down to her sexual organs as the last part of them. And it's just a wonderful compare and contrast. That when we primarily look at people from the standpoint of sexual desire, there's something base in that. There's something, I think, that's very self-focused in that often. And we've got to be really, really careful about that. And that goes to all of us. That is not at all targeted at folks with same-sex attraction. Those of you whose idea of a good marriage is marrying an attractive person, if you just get that, you'll be good. Your trophy wife, or your charming person that you are attracted to. You look and judge people based on their physical attractiveness. That's not good. That doesn't work. That's broken aspects of sexuality. Another bad question. Do they know my position on this? That's not such a great one. I don't know. Do you understand theirs? That's my response question. Do they know my position on this? A lot of folks who consider themselves as heterosexual or not struggling with same-sex attraction think they've got some mystery that they're going to help same-sex attracted people unlock. That they're automatically in a position to counsel someone with same-sex attraction simply because of the privilege of not having to deal with this exact issue. So they act as counselor, ready to come in and ready to be fit, ready to fix the situation. I'm not so sure that's the great perspective on that. Point B. So then, what are the right questions? I know you guys are getting super tired, but it looks like I'm going to end. Yeah, I'm going to end in good time, man. It's good. It's good stuff. I only have 5 more pages. You guys know that's not true. So, what are the right questions? Good question. Number 1, how do I minister to a Christian who is same-sex attracted? How do I minister to a Christian who is sex addicted? How do I minister to a Christian who seems like lives a pattern of sexual relationship that is going to end up leading to adultery at some point? How do I counsel or minister to someone who really sees sex as an important part of a relationship and can't seem to get past that? Minister to someone who's been forcing someone into having sex. I have so many girl students talk to me each semester about how do I respond to a guy that, and then I say so many, just more than I expect each semester, who's saying this, and then they show me some text message about some doofus guy trying to convince their girlfriend that having sex with them is the way that they need to express their love. Oh my gosh. That's terrible. No good. So, you fill in the blank there. How do I minister to someone? Well, number 1, and I would say this particularly with same-sex attraction, what do you believe about this and why? Have you listened to them first? Too many of our arguments about so many of these sexual issues, were developed in a vacuum. We just sort of had these, fictional conversations with ourselves, ready to, defend our perspective. What we have too little of is people's personal stories and their personal struggles in these areas. The real sermon tonight, the real lecture has been these voices from your community. Hopefully you take that as a charge that for some of you who have too many arguments lined up for people and not a lot of humility in your own life are ready to listen to the people right around you who want to talk to you about some of these real challenging issues. And that they can trust that you're not going to act out of, judgment immediately and fear and react, but truly respond to them as a person who they themselves are struggling to figure this out before God. I think that's one of the largest issues our society has often had about people with same-sex attraction is they assume that they're all fundamentally flawed somehow. That because they have a desire that may or may not even be sinful, I don't even know how to talk about that they aren't themselves struggling before. Some of them are struggling more than you've ever had to struggle when it comes to thinking about sexuality. And so we really need to listen to folks, and I think that's so important. It was really unfortunate to me that 2 years ago when we had a pretty famous speaker come to the Village area to speak on same-sex attraction, that not only did the pastor of this church totally make weird comments the entire time, but that the American Christian Biblical Counseling Association didn't even ask him to come speak and give a testimony. That instead they had a whole bunch of people who had never, as far as I know and am concerned, who had same-sex attraction ever get up and talk. But their whole talk was on same-sex attraction. How do you do that? We've got plenty of people in our community who are walking with God on this issue and are really paying attention to what He has to say. We need to listen. Okay? How can I hear from God in this struggle? There's a good question. How can you hear from God in this struggle? I'll tell you that it's my friends who are same-sex attracted or issues with transgender who've made me wrestle with God the most on some of these issues. It just made me wrestle. I said, God, how do I deal with this? How do I figure this out? How do I look across from someone who I really love, who's sharing with me an experience that I've never shared and can't have, and not just judge them when judging seems like the only thing I've got, but actually listen to them and help them and assist them and treat them like a real person who also loves God? How do I do that? And then how can I help them hear from God? I think one of the common grounds that we do have, and this has become a pretty popular way of thinking about this issue, although I would caution that I'm still not sure where I'm at with the whole liken same-sex attraction with other sexual issues completely, because it does present some really unique and interesting challenges. But I do think this framework is really helpful, and it's the framework of consistent sexual sacrifice. The idea that all of us are called to sacrifice our sexual desires. There's not a one of us in this room to get to live out our sexual desires in this life or the next, because that would be harmful. It would run counter to God's plan for us to have a full life. And at the end of those experiences, we come up empty-handed. All you guys who pretty much from birth that had the idea that I'm just going to have sex with as many people as possible, and that's really a life of fulfillment, I will line up a group of people who have lived that lifestyle, and they can share with you how unfulfilling that lifestyle's been. And you have any other issue you want to throw in that, we'll talk about it. God's plan for this stuff is the plan that's supposed to give us life and life to the fullest. If we'll just walk with Him on it, and we'll trust Him. So consistent sexual sacrifice. Guys, we're called as disciples to love and practice self-denial. It's a wonderful thing. The joy of self-denial is that we truly get to love people. When we can deny, when we have the power to deny our own interests, our own ambitions, our own things that we think make us unique and give us our identity, we have an amazing and immense power to really love and grow close to other people. Because it's often when we maximize our uniqueness and maximize our interests that often put us at odds with other people. There is no secret to why divorce in our society is so rampant and has been for 50 years. People are getting divorced for irreconcilable differences. What does that mean exactly? It means that I ultimately decided that I kind of want to do my own thing. and I'm not saying there's no reason for divorce, there certainly is. We were called to consistent sexual sacrifice. And we've got to learn that. How will I treat people I don't agree with? There's a good question for you. I don't even have an answer other than just Jesus. I feel like every person he came into contact with, he could have had something to say to them, something to disagree with them about. Point 3, sex is a good gift from a great God. It is a good gift from a great God. As many people have pointed out, and there is no marriage in heaven. In my prepubescent days, I imagined myself as being able to have sex with pretty much anyone in heaven. And that was my idea of heaven. I'm just being honest here, okay? I imagine sex as being this thing that you just kind of do. I mean, heaven in my mind at a young age was like you just do all the bad things you can't do here, like overeat and be lazy and... Okay, is that so much worse than your heaven of like harp singing on clouds? Oh, geez, yeah, I don't know. Or I also did have the idea that everything would be edible. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory stage, okay? So, each his own, okay? His own. So, sex is a good gift from a great God. Focus there is on great God, not sex. God is, it is not a demon or a God in and of itself. Those who have elevated sex to the height of adultery, and worshipped it, that's always been a problem for humans. Who've decided to just live in their most basic instinct as a pleasurable thing or as a wonderfully spiritual thing. It's not a God nor a demon in and of itself. It has a perfect purpose, and that purpose, in my mind, is God giving us the ability to experience pleasure in something that's incredibly meaningful in terms of life-giving. It's a connection with another person. Now, the connection part, some of you are like, oh yeah, I like that idea. More and more of you who belong to this postmodern mindset treat sex as an opportunity to connect with somebody. And you're like, yeah, that's just a way to connect. I'm amazed at how and I know that you guys know this world much better than I do. I'm getting up there. I'm in my mid-30s, you know. I mean, death is around the corner. But people are having sex younger and younger and more often and earlier in their relationships. My class pretty much agrees that between 3 and 6 months into a relationship is about when you're starting to have sex. And you know, this idea that it's a personal connection with someone, yeah, I mean, it is, but it's supposed to be a deep, personal representation of a communication with someone you already know pretty well. That's like me having a conversation with someone and us pretending like we've known each other for a long time because we've had one conversation. That's just faking it. And that's what a lot of sex is today. It's faking it. Faking a sense of intimacy that really isn't there. And that connection is a night connection. It's not a long connection. Nietzsche even went so far as to say, if you really want to find someone to marry, don't marry someone who's sexy. Marry someone who you can have a conversation with. But I don't think that's a really good idea either. Because my wife and I, we just sit in silence a lot of the time. We're both really silent people sometimes, and it's really wonderful. I can sit with no one in silence as good as I can sit with my wife in silence. And we have a lot of good conversations, but I was that guy that would see a married couple at dinner, and they're like not talking to each other, and I'm like, oh, they're in a fight. And now I'm married, and I'm like looking around like, who thinks we're just like in a fight? We're just living our lives, man. It's not have to say much. We just love being in each other's presence. It's just a wonderful thing. I respect her, love her deeply, and really just being in her presence is great. It's enough for me. And then we like to fight about all kinds of things, like really weird topics, and that's super fun too. So, sex is like a conversation. It can be cheap or deep. Don't take that conversation analogy too far, guys, okay? All right? I don't like that. I don't like where that's heading in my own mind. So, 1 Corinthians 6, 12 through 20, sex is like a conversation. It can be cheap or deep. A lot of the experience young people have is cheap sex. It's painful. It's really degrading. We talk a lot about this in my classes, man. It's just not real good. It's not training them or teaching them about much of anything. So I'm not going to talk about that. I will say one thing, and that is that if you want to really study where we got this idea that romance and sexual attraction kind of equals desire or equals orientation, you might want to go back and study Rousseau. I can never say his last name. I think the French philosopher. He had some really weird ideas about this. real quick, he reacted to the whole economic stability of farm life and this whole really practical way of looking at romance. And he said, you know what? This isn't real marriage. People aren't marrying for love. What's really real is people using the one desire that they have, which is to have sex with another person and to really love them and be with them physically. And that's what ultimately will, really inform who they are and how they should get married. And that idea, that one little nugget of an idea just sort of blew up. It took a while, but it kind of blew up. So if you want to study that on your own, okay? That sort of idealized understanding of sexuality. Okay, where do we go from here? B. Where do we go from here? Look at me doing under an hour. I had an hour and 30 minutes. Yes. All of you people at my church who say that I speak too long, I am 30 minutes under. This is awesome. And I haven't even skipped that much stuff. Yeah. Yeah, right? Okay, where do we go from here? We need better dialogue. Better dialogue that I've already said this, guys, but better dialogue that centers on people's stories. Not on theology and not on ideas. Theology is ultimately our way of trying to understand God. And in doing so, we've made God to be all kinds of things He never intended to be. And when we operate out of theology first, we often paint God as, not so great. So we need to really dialogue. And this needs to center on people's stories and not just theology and ideas, guys. People who have all kinds of sexual struggles, issues, questions should feel free to discuss those in our community. And whether we ultimately agree with them or not is really besides the point. The main point is that they feel comfortable being able to talk through those things. They don't got to run off to a community that's just going to accept their ideas wholesale. They can actually discuss that and remain in community and conversation with people who fundamentally disagree with them. Because you've treated them right in having that conversation. You've respected their identity and their personhood and who they feel they are before God. And you've addressed their questions and their concerns, not as an end-all, absolute be-all, but as a way that, in the similar vein that Jesus did, He took who we were and He dealt with that. He wasn't clouded in His judgment or His understanding about us. He knew what was in our hearts, inside and out, and He still was able to love us. And that's amazing, something that the religious people could not do with other people, which caused them to hide all kinds of their sin. So we got to center on people's stories, not theologies and ideas. We've got to be responsive and not reactive. 2 scriptures that you might want to look into, but I don't have their exact references. Sorry. Luke 16, the part where, what is happening there? Luke 16, I don't remember. Just figure it out. Be like a search, you can what part should apply here? I have no clue. Just kidding. That's terrible. John 2 is another one. Luke 16. I don't know why I didn't write the full references out for this. My brain. Oh, man. I'm sorry. Luke 16. 13 through... 14. Luke 16, 14 through 18. Yeah. And in John 2... 20 through 25. I was about to say, you're going to have a hard enough time trying to figure out how those apply, so I'll probably just give you the exact reference so you can struggle through it. Great. We need to rediscover God's love and mercy for the underdog in our society, stop acting out of privilege, and really call people to the holiness that is life-giving and life-changing. I wrote that funny little quote from C.S. Lewis. I don't normally quote Lewis because, he wasn't that smart. Just kidding. It's so cool not to be in love with C.S. Lewis. So, trying, And it's a funny quote. It's a funny quote. So, all right. I don't know if Brandon's going to come up or not since we're right on time. Do you want me to pray to end us? How do you feel about that?
I want to thank the people that wrote those testimonies again.
Absolutely. I'll end with a prayer. Lord God, thank you so much for creating us so uniquely and so beautifully, for giving us the pleasure of touch and just the pleasure of knowing people and being known. Lord, I pray that you would continue to mold and develop us into a community that is open to hear people's stories, to walk alongside them in their struggles. Help us not do what is so easy to do and give people a checklist before they can be our friend and before they can be a part of us. Help us to treat people like you did, accepting people, loving people, strangest of people to the most put together people. I pray that you would continually guide us in this really tricky subject of sexuality, that we would embrace what we can in our society and call our society to a higher standard as redeemers of our society, that we would live that out in our homes and bedrooms and in the private spaces of our lives. Lord, we love you and we thank you so much for how good and how great you are amidst our brokenness. Amen.